Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Morgan family. The Morgan dynasty refers to a wealthy and influential American family that made its fortune in the banking industry. The family's patriarch, Junius Spencer Morgan, was born in 1813 and began his career as a banker in Boston. He later moved to London, where he worked for the banking firm George Peabody & Co. and established his own firm, J.S. Morgan & Co. Junius Spencer Morgan's son, John Pierpont Morgan, also known as J.P. Morgan, became one of the most powerful financiers of all time. It is said that during the bank crisis in 1893, J.P. Morgan borrowed 100 tons of gold to the U.S. authorities, which is how he and his family would later go on to control the gold in the USA. He expanded the family's banking empire and played a major role in financing many of the largest industrial and infrastructure projects of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including the creation of U.S. Steel, General Electric, and International Harvester. There are some pretty dark beliefs that some have about this family that ties to their involvement in both world wars, as well as the fact that members of the family played significant roles in the founding of the Federal Reserve System and the International Monetary Fund. The family's wealth and influence has allowed them to maintain close ties to the political and the social elite. Today, the Morgans still own the biggest family reserve of gold, and rumor has it that it is connected by a tunnel with the New York branch of the U.S. Central Bank. In our number 9 spot today, we have the DuPont family. The DuPont family is a prominent family of French descent that has played a very significant role in the development of the United States since the late 18th century. The family has been involved in a variety of industries, including chemicals, gunpowder, textiles, and agriculture. The DuPont family's story began with, the first DuPont, who was a French chemist who immigrated to the United States in 1800. He would later go on to found a chemical company that specialized in the production of gunpowder. The company's success helped to establish the DuPont family as one of the wealthiest and most powerful in the United States. These roots only grew deeper as the family allegedly ensured the U.S. purchase of Louisiana from Napoleon in 1803. During World War II, the family's chemical company played a very significant role in the Manhattan Project, which developed the very first atomic bomb. The family has also been involved in politics, with several members serving as governors, senators, and other elected officials. Some even believe that this family had the ability to influence U.S. authorities so much that they might be responsible for the initial ban of the production of hemp and the ban on the devil's lettuce in order to protect the production of nylon, which was one of the most important products for the DuPont company. Today, the company is one of the biggest producers of GMO seeds, and they also have founded the Doomsday Treasury, where samples of all plants are held and preserved in the case of an apocalypse. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Rothschild family. The Rothschild dynasty is a very wealthy and influential family that gained prominence in the late 18th and early 19th centuries through their banking and financial activities. The family originated in Frankfurt, Germany, and its founder, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, began his banking career in the 1760s. Apparently, he sent 5 of his sons to financial centers so that the family could be involved in all of the most important places for world finances. The Rothschilds quickly became one of the most powerful banking families in Europe, with branches in major cities such as Paris, Vienna, and London. They financed governments, monarchs, and other wealthy individuals and played a very significant role in the economic and political affairs of many European countries. One of the most notable achievements of the family was their role in financing the British war effort against Napoleon Bonaparte in the early 19th century. The family used their vast network of agents and couriers to get information about the outcome of battles before anyone else, which allowed them to make informed decisions about investments. The Rothschilds also played a key role in the development of the modern banking system, including the establishment of the Bank of England and the introduction of the concept of a central bank. Today, the family remains one of the wealthiest and most influential in the world, with a net worth estimated at several billions of dollars, with some estimating that they manage trillions of dollars worth of money. Some even claim that the Rothschild family controls the world through the U.S. Central Bank Federal Reserve.
Number 7. House of Valois. The House of Valois faced internal conflicts, external threats, and controversies that shaped the political landscape of the medieval and early modern France. These challenges challenges contributed to the broader historical developments and transitions in European history during this period. The 100-Year War, a conflict between England and France, began during the reign of Philip VI of Valois. The war had a significant political, economic, and social consequences for both countries. Battles, again, such as the Agincourt of 1415 and the Joan of Arc's involvement, further fueled the controversies during this period. The Treaty of Troyes was a controversial agreement that recognized Henry V of England as the heir to the French throne, and it disinherited the Dauphin Charles. The Valois dynasty had complex relationships, while other European powers, including the Bourguignon dukes and the Habsburgs, marriage alliances and conflict with these houses influenced the courses of European politics and sometimes resulted into controversial outcomes. Number 6, the Carolingians. The controversial and challenges faced by the Carolingians dynasty reflect in the complex political, social, and economic dynasties of their time. The eventual fragmentation and decline of the Carolingian Empire paved the way for the rise of new political entities, resurrection of medieval Europe. After the death of Louis the Pious, the empire faced internal strife over succession. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 divided the empire into 3 parts, among Louis' 3 grandsons, marking the beginning of the separate kingdoms of West Francia, East Francia, and Middle Francia. This division contributed to the fragmentation of the Carolingian realm, and the Carolingian Empire faced repeated Viking raids and invasions during the 9th century. These raids led to widespread devastation, economic disruption, and challenges to the Carolingian authority. The inability to effectively repel Viking incursions raised questions about the empire's ability to provide security, and the internal struggles, the power struggles, conflict among the rulers and their noble supporters were recurring issues among the time. Civil wars such as rebellions against Charles the Bald, great name, in West Francia and Louis the German in East Francia and highlighted the instability within their empire. Number 5, House of Lusignan. The House of Lusignan, the medieval French noble family, which again, my bad if I can't say their name, I think they're still around, became particularly notable for its involvement in various European regions, including Cyprus and the Kingdom of Jerusalem during the Crusades. Guy of Lusignan, a member of the Lusignan family, became the king of Cyprus after the conquest of the island by Richard of the Lionheart during the Third Crusade. This event marked the beginning of the Lusignan dynasty rule in Cyprus. However, the circumstances of Guy's rule was very controversial as he faced opposition from local nobles and factions. The Lusignans were also involved in the Kingdom of Jerusalem during the Crusades. The loss of Jerusalem in Saladin in 1187 was a significant blow, and the subsequent attempts to regain control faced challenges. The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the end of the Crusaders' presence in the Holy Land. James II of Cyprus faced controversies during his reign, marked by conflicts by the Venetians and internal oppositions, and his rule was characterized by the political intrigue and financial difficulties, and he eventually abdicated in favor of his daughter Charlotte. The Lusignans were initially a prominent noble family in France before branching out to other regions, and their involvement in various political and military activities in France added to the family's overall historical significance. Number 4, the House of Lancaster and York. As mentioned in number 5, was initially a prominent noble family in France before branching out to other regions. Their involvement in various political and military activities in France added to the family's overall historical significance. As we know from number 8, one of the most enduring controversies of the War of the Roses is the fate of the young princes in the Tower, Edward V and his brother Richard, who disappeared while under the guardianship of their uncle, Richard III. The mystery surrounding their disappearance had led to various theories, including possibilities of their death, and the execution of Richard, Duke of York, the father of Edward IV and Richard III, was a pivotal event that intensified hostilities between the houses. It set the stage for further conflicts and fueled the desire for vengeance. The Battle of Towtown was one of the largest, bloodiest battles of the War of Roses. The Yorkist victory of Towtown secured the throne for Edward IV, but was resulted in significant casualties that further enmity between the houses. The War of Roses left a lasting impact on the English history, shaping the course of the monarch and influencing the subsequent events. Number 3, the House of Draculesti. Vlad the Impaler belonged to the House of Draculesti, a noble family with the ties of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order. The name of Draculesti is often associated with the Romanian word Dracul, meaning devil or dragon. The association of the dragon is sometimes linked to the title Dracula, famously associated with the vampires in later folklore. Vlad's father, Vlad II, was the member of an Order of the Dragon. However, the circumstances surrounding his reign and relationship with other nobles, including political allegiance and conflicts, have been subject of historical debate. Vlad and his younger brother Radul was held captive by the Ottoman Empire as a form of assurance for their father's loyalty. Vlad's imprisonment and the events that led to his release are not entirely clear, and there are different accounts of the conditions of his captivity and return to Wallachia. One of the most controversial and notorious events associated with Vlad the Impaler is the night attack of the Travogoty in 1462. After reclaiming the throne, Vlad launched a brutal campaign against the Ottomans and his political rivals. Thousands were reportedly impaled on long, sharp stakes, earning him the epithet the Impaler. The controversial aspect of Vlad's rule has contributed to his lasting legacy in folklore, popular culture, as Bram Stoker's Dracula drew inspiration from Vlad the Impaler. The character of Count Dracula is often associated with this historical figure. Number 2, House of Sforza. Sforza. House of Sforza initially gained power in Milan through military prowess. Francesco Sforza, the founder of the dynasty, married Bianca Maria Visconti, an illegitimate daughter of the last Visconti Duke of Milan, and seized control of the city. This military takeover raised questions about the legitimacy of their rule, as Galenzio Maria Sforza, son of Francesco, faced controversy during his rule due to his lavish lifestyle, patronage of the arts, and alleged of tyranny. His reign was marked by political intrigue, cruelty, and a focus on personal indulgence, leading to both administration and criticism. But then Galenzio Maria Sforza was assassinated in 1476, allegedly by his conspirators by his own court. The circumstances surrounding his assassination and identities of the perpetrators are subjects of historical debate. Some believe that his own relatives were involved with the plot, as Ludovico Sforza, also known as Ludovico il Moro, usurped power from his nephew, whom he had previously served as regent, and the Sforza family was known for its intricate political maneuvers, forming alliances with various Italian states and European powers. These alliances sometimes led to conflicts and controversies as the family navigated the complex web of Renaissance diplomacy. And finally, at number 1, the Habsburgs. Habsburg's family has expanded as one of the longest reigning, as well as one of their two branches, both Spanish and Dutch relations. This family is the most evil as they use their political powers and means to control so many countries around the world. Countries that still hold their colonial rule in their culture, food, language, and in some cases their name. Philip II of Spain, a member of the Habsburg dynasty, was a staunch supporter of the Catholic Church and the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was responsible for persecuting heretics and religious deniers, and its methods were brutal and controversial. Maximilian I, Holy Roman Empire, and member of the Habsburg family, dealt harshly with the Anabaptists during the German Peasants' War. He ordered the execution of Anabaptist leaders, contributing to religious tensions in the Holy Roman Empire, and Ferdinand II, Habsburg ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, played a central role in the 30-Year War. His policies aimed at recatholicizing areas that had adopted Protestantism led to widespread conflict, destruction, and loss of life. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austrian-Hungarian War, was a key trigger for the World War I. The subsequent action of the Habsburgs led Austrian-Hungarian Empire in issuing an ultimatum to Serbia and entering the war had profound and far-reaching consequences. As his family ties into so many conflicts and war as a result of loss of life is why they're number 1 due to their obsession in this era as time of expansion of land and rulership and religion.
So to start, it's Genghis Khan. That's probably the most obvious start in this case. Good old Genghis was the ruler and emperor of the Mongol Empire, the largest empire in history. How'd he do that? Well, even if they were outnumbered, which they usually were, the Mongols were masters of tactical and psychological warfare. They always had one-time offer for any city or civilization they came across. If this people in the town surrendered, the Mongols would treat them well and allow them the fruits of a secure world. They had considerable personal liberty, religious freedoms, and overall more rights. Once the Mongols were empowered, their land was safe and well controlled. If, however, the people resisted the Mongol advance, they and their cities would feel the full fury of the enraged invaders. The Mongols were violent, decapitating a path from the west shores of the Black Sea to the Pacific. Some experts calculate that fully 11% of the world's population died because of the Mongol expansion. He died in 1227 himself after defeating the Tanguts, and he left his successor and sons to handle everything. Don't think they were any better, however. His grandson told the Pope that he'd only protect Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem if the Pope brought every king of Christendom to Khan to swear fealty. And his son committed one of the worst Mongol atrocities recorded against the Oryats. So I could go on, but we got more freaks to talk about. Your takeaway is don't mess with a Mongol. Ed Hardy fans, you'll know this one, the Krays. Dramatized in the 2015 movie Legends, these identical twins are unique in comparison to other criminal empire leaders. They ruled East End London with an iron fist during the swingin' 60s. Their criminal empire depended on robbery and protection rackets to thrive. The Krays and their associates would ensure compliance by readily resorting to arson, assault, and killings. The fear they inspired stopped even the most cowardly of snitches from saying a peep. They operated out of a nightclub and they were familiar figures on the street. But the streets are different during the day, and surprising to many, ordinary people who were untouched by the Krays' business interests actually revered them. They acted as a sort of local authority, helping people with their problems, debts, hurtful spouses, or failing homes. They guaranteed safety on the street and delivered it. It wasn't even just the ordinary people that admired the Kray brothers, but celebrities and politicians too. The police arrested them in 1968 after Ronnie's mental decline, caused by his refusal to take medication, led to the operation to make some sloppy mistakes. AKA, he literally killed 2 people at separate public events. 2 occasions, guys. Ronnie was sent to a high-security psychiatric facility due to his instability, but also his homosexuality. Unfortunately, that's how the times were. He died in 1995 while his brother died in 2000, 5 weeks after authorities released him from prison on a compassion ground for his terminal cancer. This Spanish family has lurid tales, but Are they fact or are they fiction? The Borgias. Originally from Spain, the family became important in 15th century political and religious world. Caesar, the Borgias patriarch's father, was elected pope in 1492 of the titular church of Santa Maria Nova, making Caesar the archbishop and later the cardinal in 1492. Caesar, however, had no interest in religious vocation. He was better known at the papal court for his hunting parties and amorous liaisons and flashy clothes, rather than meticulous religious observations. On the death of Pedro Luis in 1488, the title of Duke of Granada had been handed past him and gone to his younger brother Juan. When Juan was mysteriously murdered in 1497, the rumor gradually spread that Caesar was the culprit. Ambitious and hungry for yet more power, the family included two popes, one of which was Alexander, the father of the famous Lucrezia. Her family was perfectly happy to use her as a pawn in their power plays. She entered into several arranged marriages, each one helped the Borgias extend their grip. She's also what inspired the belief that they really kept it in the family. After retiring to Naples after being a professional wife, Giovanni, dubbed the Roman infant, is seen at approximately age 3 for the first time. Two papal bulls recognized the child as an illegitimate son of first Caesar, her uncle, and then of Alexander, her dad, who probably was the true father. The mysterious origin of the child, as well as her presence at a celebrated night group romp in the Vatican, has been used to support the rumors. You can learn more about this disastrous family in a 3-season TV drama literally named after them, The Borgias.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Louis XIV. During the reign of Louis XIV, poison was one of those things you just really had to worry about. It was on the rise as an easy and sneaky way to take people out and change the course of inheritance and influence. Because of the worries surrounding possible poisonings and stories of people close to the king doing some shady stuff, investigations began. It was soon found out that the king's chief mistress, the Marquis de Montespan, was said to be quite the client of Catherine Monvoisin. Catherine was a Parisian salesperson who sold powders and potions that were meant to catch the attention of the king. You know, love potion stuff. But among these love potion stories were also stories of horrifying rituals and rites of practice in order to get these alleged powers. These stories, of course, terrified the king, and this led to him ordering for Catherine to be burned at the stake, and not only this, but hundreds of others were implicated as well. Some passed from the conditions they were being held under, others were executed, and some saw punishments that spared their lives, but their reputations were forever tarnished. For the chief mistress, however, well, although she was connected to this entire ordeal, she was the mother of several of the king's children, and because of this close connection to the king, she wasn't arrested or tried. Instead, though, she was retired and sent to a convent to live the rest of her life. In our number 6 spot today, we have Sophia Dorothea. Daughter of the Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, she was betrothed to her first cousin, George. Now, history says that George wasn't the most attractive man with the nickname Pig Snout, but George was in quite a position where he was potentially the heir to 2 thrones, so of course the Duke agreed to hand his daughter over in hopes of her securing a crown. Princess Sophia obviously did not like this and apparently fainted when she heard of the betrothal in 1682. The marriage did go through, but things went downhill quite quickly and turned very violent. Flash forward to the time when Count von Königsmarck arrived from Sweden, and suddenly Sophia had a new interest. Not long after his arrival, the pair were having quite the affair that wasn't exactly as discreet as you might have assumed. The pair made a plan to run away together and make a new life far, far away from Pig Snout. Unfortunately, however, the night before the pair were supposed to run off, the Count just disappeared. There are plenty of theories of what might have happened to the Count, including a jealous former lover and, of course, George. In the end, the rumors were swirling and George was super mad about it, so he divorced Sophia, took the kids, and sent her to be imprisoned in a small castle on the lake. In the end, George went on to become King George I of England, and he left Sophia behind. In our number 5 spot today, we have Marie Antoinette. In 1783, an artist painted a portrait of Marie Antoinette. This would go on to become one of the most scandalous royal portraits of all time because of the dress that she was wearing. The dress, a gaulle, wasn't the regular restrictive court dress, and instead was something that the queen would normally wear as she strolled around the grounds of Versailles privately. This comfortable dress, however, was a little bit too scandalous for the public at the time because it resembles a form of undergarment worn to protect expensive clothing. Basically, to the public, it looked like the queen had just been painted in her underwear. Not only were people upset that she didn't upkeep this sort of mystique of luxury and royalty, but the fabric the gown was made from was also quite controversial. The cotton dress was heavily associated with the slave trade and was looked on as a British fabric, which was horrible for a French queen to be wearing. The painting was quickly taken down, but the damage was already done. Within the next decade, the queen would meet her demise at the hands of the guillotine. In our number 4 spot today, we have Atahualpa and Huascar. These two were the two sons of the Inca king, but when he passed away in 1527, the kingdom was left to the sons, but their joint rule did not turn out so well. By 1529, war had broken out and things were going downhill. What would later become known as the War of the Two Brothers saw many horrors, and apparently one brother at one point made a drinking cup out of the skull of one of the other brother's generals. The civil war that the two started would definitely speed up the downfall of the civilization, but things met an even crazier end. Just as Atahualpa seemed close to declaring his victory in 1532, Francisco Pizarro's Spanish conquistadors showed up and captured him to hold him for ransom. During this time, he was still able to get out a message to execute his brother. In the end, while he outlived his brother, it wouldn't be by much because he was then executed by the Spanish in 1533. In our number 3 spot today, we have Richard III. There are many questions surrounding this king's rise to power because, well, it seems sketchy, at best. When King Edward IV died in 1483, he left behind 2 sons. The eldest of the two, Edward V, was too young to rule on his own, so the sons were to be looked after and to be advised by Richard III, the late king's brother. Well, something strange happened after just 68 days when the sons were sent to the Tower of London and then were never heard from again. Of course, this meant that Richard III needed to take over the throne. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the sons, as they have never been found. Was this just a tragic coincidence, or is Richard III a usurper? Richard met his fate in battle just 2 years later and took these secrets with him to the grave. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Wanli Emperor. The 13th emperor of China's Ming Dynasty, Wanli had many relations with women. He is said to have had 2 official consorts and a number of concubines, but one of these ladies was clearly his favorite, Lady Zheng. She had 2 sons, and one of them, Wanli, really wanted to be his successor. Unfortunately, this son was the 3rd of his children, so his ministers and those around him wouldn't allow it. They believed he wasn't the proper heir. In the end, the first son of Wanli, who was born to consort Lady Wang, was declared the crown prince. This is when the emperor decided that since he didn't have his way, he was just gonna quit working. Prior to this entire dilemma, Wanli was looked upon as a great ruler. He worked hard and he handled the threats to the empire very quickly. This was all extremely contradictory to the final 20 years of his reign, where he apparently just started ignoring meetings and royal duties. This is why many historians actually place a lot of the blame for the downfall of the Ming Dynasty in 1644 to this sort of passive-aggressive protest. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Joan of Kent. Joan of Kent lived during the 14th century in England, and she was known as being one of the most beautiful women in all of England. She was said to be quite loving, but it is also said that she had quite a whirlwind and controversial love life. So basically, Joan was only 12 when she had her first marriage. I know it's horrifying now, but this was the practice at the time, and she married a knight named Tom Holland. But when Tom went off to war, Joan was approached by another man, the son of the Earl of Salisbury, who asked for her hand in marriage. Despite the whole Tom situation, she said yes, because at the time there was no way for anyone to know who would be coming back from battle, and she just assumed that Tom had died. It was of course quite the shock to everyone when Tom ended up returning, very much alive, to find out about all of this. A legal battle followed, which Tom ended up winning, and him and Joan went on to raise 4 children. After his passing, however, Joan would go on to marry again, to the dismay of many people, but this time she married the son of King Edward III, and she went on to become the first Princess of Wales. Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have Isabella of France. Back in 1313, Isabella, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, made a gift for a group of noblewomen that her brothers were marrying. She gifted the 3 women these embroidered purses, and as it turns out, these gifts would soon lead to their demise. Basically, the following year after giving these gifts, Isabella spotted 2 of these purses in the possession of a pair of knights. You can probably already see where this is going, but of course Isabella was suspicious of this now, so she passed on the information to her father. From here, he had people watch the wives of his sons as a sort of investigation. Soon, 2 of the wives were found guilty of adultery with the knights, and it was discovered that an old guard tower acted as their secret meeting place. The women were placed into prison for the rest of their lives, and the men men met gruesome fates that ensured they paid for their disloyalty. This had lasting repercussions, however, because with their wives in prison, the king's sons now didn't produce any male heirs before they passed away, and thus the 100 Years' War was born when the son of Isabella, Edward III of England, attempted to claim the French throne. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Prince of Brunei. Brunei's prince, Jeffrey Bolkiah, is the brother to the Sultan, and a few years ago he found himself in quite the scandal. Basically, in 1997, Shannon Marketic accused the prince and the Sultan of flying her and many others to Brunei under false pretenses. In this scandal, everyone escaped any kind of charges due to diplomatic immunity. Then we moved to 2000, where the Sultan himself sued his brother for apparently embezzling $14.8 million from the Brunei Investment Agency, which is in charge of things like their oil revenues. While he denies the charges, he agreed to hand over a number of his personal belongings to the government in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution and being allowed to stay at his residence. This was quite messy for the outwardly luxurious prince, but since then it doesn't seem as though any major scandals have come to light, and the Sultan remains one of the last absolute monarchs in the world. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ferdinand I. The King of Naples from 1458 to 1494, Ferdinand was looked on quite fairly as a leader, but he was also known for being quite a ruthless leader in a lot of aspects as well. He was 35 years old when he came into power, and in 1485 he was faced with a revolt among the nobility. Ferdinand quickly put a stop to this, but promised the nobility a general amnesty before later turning against them and executing a number of them. For the most significant offenders against Ferdinand, however, he had quite a specific treatment for them. After their slaying, the king would have these enemies embalmed, dressed, and then posed in his quote black museum. This seems like a weird hobby you probably would want to keep hidden, but not Ferdinand. He loved it and was so proud of it. He would even take his guests on a tour of the place if he suspected that they may be treacherous. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Windsor family. The Windsor family is of course the current reigning royal family of the United Kingdom. The dynasty was established in 1970 when King George V changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. The House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which itself was a branch of the House of Wettin, was a prominent German dynasty. Queen Victoria married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and their descendants went on to become the rulers of several European countries. Many of us are of course privy to the many royal scandals there have been over the years for the Windsors, whether that has to do with the current king and his late wife, the very unsettling Prince Andrew, or some of the ongoing situations with Harry and Meghan. The former monarch, Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II, ascended the throne in 1952 following the death of her father, King George VI. She was the longest reigning monarch in British history and oversaw very significant changes to the role and responsibilities of the British monarchy during her reign. Of course, as a monarch, this family retains quite a bit of power, a whole pile of wealth, and they are still heavily influential. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Walton family. The Walton family is one of the wealthiest families in the world and is best known for founding and owning the retail giant Walmart. This family is headed by siblings Jim, Alice, and Rob Walton, who inherited their fortune from their father, Sam Walton, who initially founded Walmart in 1962. Sam Walton began his career in retail with a single store in Arkansas, and over the years he and his family grew Walmart into the largest retailer in the entire world, with thousands of stores in the United States and all around the world. Today, Walmart is a Fortune 500 company and one of the largest employers in the world, with over 2 million employees. The Walton family's net worth is estimated to be around $230 billion, making them one of the wealthiest families in the world. In addition to their stake in Walmart, the family also has investments in other businesses and ventures, and throughout the years the company receives both praise for their practices, but more often than not are met with criticism for much of the questionable and shady dealings. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family is a very prominent American family that has played a very significant role in business, politics, philanthropy, and society for over a century. The family's wealth really started out with John D. Rockefeller, who founded the Standard Oil Company in the late 19th century and became one of the richest men in history. John actually had a major impact on the American economy, transforming the oil industry and creating a very vast empire that completely dominated the market. His business practices, including aggressive competition and horizontal integration, drew both admiration as well as criticism. The Rockefellers also had a hand in helping the construction of the United Nations, and they also founded Bilderberg, Williamsburg, which is where the most powerful people in the world meet up. Other notable members of the Rockefeller family include Nelson Rockefeller, who served as governor of New York and vice president of the United States, and David Rockefeller, who was a very prominent banker and philanthropist. The family continues to be involved in various industries and philanthropic activities, with some estimates suggesting that their combined wealth is in the billions of dollars. Some out there also believe that the Rockefeller family now controls things, but in secret, through oil companies like ExxonMobil and BP, as well as through banks like Chase Manhattan Bank. In our number 4 spot today, we have the House of Saud. The House of Saud is the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia, and they have been in power since the country was founded in 1932. Over the years, the House of Saud has maintained its grip on power through a combination of political alliances, military force, and religious legitimacy. The family has also been able to leverage its vast oil wealth to consolidate its power both domestically and internationally. When the vast oil resources hidden in Saudi Arabia were found, it not only completely changed the economy of the nation, but it also catapulted the House of Saud into the world of richest families ever. The current king of Saudi Arabia is King Salman, who ascended to the throne in 2015 following the death of his half-brother King Abdullah. The current king's son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is widely regarded as the de facto ruler of the country. Of course, because of their mass amount of wealth and their current political position, it is no wonder this royal family remains on the list of powerful families in the world. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Bush family. The Bush family is a very prominent American political family that has produced 2 US presidents, several other notable politicians, and successful business people. The story of the Bush dynasty really starts off with Prescott Sheldon Bush, who was a successful businessman and US senator from Connecticut. Allegedly, he became a member of a group called Skull and Bones and apparently was behind the failed military coup in 1933, which was aimed at taking power away from Franklin Roosevelt. During the Second World War, he was also the head of the Union Banking Corporation. This is all fine and well until the bank was impounded due to their connections with, well, you know who, the evil head of the Second World War. The Bush legacy continued on with his son, George H.W. Bush, who served as vice president under Ronald Reagan and was later elected president in 1988. George H.W. Bush's son, George W. Bush, served as governor of Texas and was also elected president, serving from 2001 to 2009. For people around my age, this is probably the most well-known member of the Bush family, and that is due to the multiple scandals surrounding his presidency, which would include the Iraq War as well as the response to Hurricane Katrina. Other notable members of the Bush family include Jeb Bush, another son of George H.W., who served as governor of Florida and ran unsuccessfully for president in 2016, as well as Neil Bush, who is also a businessman. Overall, the Bush family has had a significant impact on American politics and public life, and their legacy continues to be felt today. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Cook family. The legacy of the Cook family dynasty really all starts back with the founding of the Cook Company. The company was founded by Fred C. Cook in 1940 and was later taken over by his sons Charles and David, who transformed it into a major conglomerate. Today, Cook Industries generates billions of dollars in revenue and employs tens of thousands of people around the world. The Cook brothers were also known for their significant involvement in conservative politics and advocacy. They were major donors to a variety of causes and organizations that promoted limited government, free markets, and individual liberty. The brothers also founded and supported a number of think tanks and political organizations, including the Cato Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and the Charles Cook Foundation, of course. David Cook did pass away a few years ago in 2019, but Charles is still involved, and Cook Industries is said to bring in over $1 trillion in annual revenue, which makes it one of the largest private firms in America. Some speculate that this mass fortune is sometimes used to assist in having a hand in political influence. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Soros family. This family is perhaps best known for its patriarch, George Soros, who is a billionaire investor. Born in Hungary in 1930 and surviving through the atrocities of the Second World War, George would later become a very successful investor, earning his fortune through his hedge fund, Soros Fund Management. It is said that George and his success could largely be attributed to a very famous moment in history. On September 16, 1992, George helped his fund bring in $1 billion billion in a single day, and he did this by short-selling the British pound. This day would go on to become known as Black Wednesday and went on to solidify him being known as, quote, the man who broke the Bank of England. Today, his family, which includes his children, is among the most powerful families in the world due to their active geopolitical actions. Their influence and interest extends beyond the financial sector, as they are also heavily active in politics as well.
Number 10. The Borgias. The Borgia family, originating from Spain, rose to prominence during the Italian Renaissance in the late 15th century. The family played a significant role in both escalating political affairs, and they are often associated with intrigue, political maneuvering, and accusations of corruption. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, is one of the most well-known members of the Borgia family. His papacy was marked by accusation of nepotism, corruption, and political scheming. Cesare Borgia, the son of the Pope, was a key figure in the family's political ambitions. He served as a military commander and played a role in the complex power struggles of the Renaissance Italy. Lucrezia Borgia, the daughter of the Pope, used her marriages as a strategic ploy and was even accused in involving with poisons. The Borgia family faced numerous accusations, including alleged bribery, simony, and immoral behavior. Some historical accounts suggest that they even used their influence in the papacy for personal gain. Of course, that's pretty not surprising. The Borgia family's legacy had been subjected with fascination and controversy. Various historical and fictional works, include books, television series, and films, have depicted the Borgias as often emphasizing their political maneuvering, ambition, and alleged moral failings. Number 9. Merovingians. One historical debate revolves around the question of why the Merovingian kings experienced a decline in their authority. Some historians argue that the internal strife, weak leadership, and the rise of powerful noble families and mayors of the palace contributed to the decay of royal power. Others suggest that the kings intentionally adopted a more symbolic role, while real power shifted in regional leaders. The role of women in this political family was a society in an era of historical interest and debate. Some historians argue that the Merovingian queens, such as Brunhilde and Fergegen, played a significant role in political affairs and intrigue, while others emphasizes the limitation imposed on women in that societal context. Like in many historical dynasties, the Merovingians faced disputes over succession, which sometimes led to violence and internal conflicts. The lack of a clear and consistent system of succession contributed to their instability. Number 8. House of Plantagenet. The House of Plantagenet, a royal house that ruled in England from the 12th to the 15th century, was marked by several controversies and events. One of the early controversies was involved with a sudden death of Thomas Becket, a Archbishop of Canterbury, in 1170. Becket and the King Henry II had a conflict over the authority of the church, and Becket's death in the Canterbury Cathedral led to a significant tension between the crown and the church. King John faced a rebellion by his barons due to perceived control of power, and in 1215 he reluctantly signed the Magna Carta, a document that aimed to limiting the king's power and establishing certain legal protections for subjects. The signing of the Magna Carta is a landmark event in the development of constitutional principles, and Richard III, the last Plantagenet king, is often associated with the mysterious disappearance of his nephews, the young Edward V and his brother Richard. In the Tower of London specifically was the last of their known place. The fate of the princes is a historical mystery, and Richard III has been accused of ordering their death.
Time to take life insurance policies out. We're meeting the Castro Angel Landing family. Cult. You know, there had to be at least one coming up. They love to call themselves families after all. Angel's Landing is the name of a 20-acre compound outside of Wichita, Kansas, where Lou Castro and a small group of people lived an inexplicably extravagant life in the early 2000s. His followers were convinced he was an angel seer who saw the future and knew how people were gonna die. Turns out the reason he knew was because he was gonna be the one making it happen. Patricia Hughes showed up dead in 2003, and police turned their attention to the secluded luxury compound. There were high-end vehicles and appliances, well-kept lavish homes, pools, and just a lot of wealth that wasn't accounted for or could be explained. Then Patricia's husband dies in 2006 on compound once again by a freak accident, and Ron Goodwin dived into every bit of personal and financial information he could find on the people living at Angel's Landing. Turns out our buddy Castro took out expensive life insurance policies on certain cult members and had them cashed in by other members when someone in the makeshift family accidentally died. This pattern occurred around every 2 years and for about a decade unnoticed. Turns out his name wasn't even Lou Castro, but Daniel Perez, a man from Texas with many police reports. Perez was charged with 28 felonies, and in February 2015 he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 80 years in prison. The cult was later profiled on an episode of Oxygen's Deadly Cult. Next up is Lucky Luciano. We love a fun and flirty nickname, one he earned for success at evading arrest and winning craps games. Lucky was the most powerful chief of American organized crime in the early 1930s and a major influence even from prison and after deportation to Italy. At 10 he was already involved in muggings, shoplifting, extortion. After a 6-month jail sentence when he was a teen, Lucky teamed up with Frank Costello and Mayor Lansky and other young gangs and later New York's rising crime boss Joe Masseria, who he becomes second-hand man to. In October of 1929, he becomes the rare survivor of a one-way ride when he's abducted by 4 men in a car, beaten, stabbed, had his throat slit from ear to ear, and was left for dead. But he survived and never named his abductors. Metal. Lucky had carefully nurtured his contacts with the young powers and had become the boss of all bosses without ever accepting or claiming the title. By 1934, he and the leaders of other crime families had developed the National Crime Syndicate. In 1936, Lucky was indicted, tried, and convicted for his brothels and call girl empire, and was sentenced to Clinton prison for a 30 to 50-year term. From his cell, he continued to rule and issue orders, and in 1942, the luxury liner Normandy was destroyed in the New York harbor, and Navy intelligence sought Luciano's help in tightening waterfront security. Lucky gave the orders, and sabotage on the docks ended, and in 1946 his sentence was commuted and he was deported to Italy, where he settled in Rome. He then bounced from Cuba to Naples and continued his crime empire until he died of a heart attack in an airport in Naples, Florida in 1962. A family gang of 4 so ferocious they have a catchy nickname to prove it: the Benders. The Benders settled in isolated Labette County, Kansas in the early 1870s following the New Spiritualism movement. This is because Kate, in her early 20s, was renowned for performing seances that showed off her psychic abilities at the store inn that the family ran. But this wasn't as picturesque as it seems. Historians are very confident that the Benders, living as a husband, wife, young adult son, young adult daughter dynamic, actually weren't even related, and none of them were even named Bender. Well, it'd be no biggie if it wasn't for the fact so many people who happened to pass through Labette County never made it to their final destinations, including a well-known local doctor, William York. After a community meeting about York, attended by both of the male Benders, it resulted in a search party formation, and it was soon noted that the Bender homestead appeared recently abandoned and full of evidence. Near the table where the guests were served was a trap door, and the foul-smelling hole beneath the door was just full of blood and gross stuff. The ground in an orchard nearby the house has been carefully plowed, but one small section was noticeably indented. The ground was dug up and revealed the decomposed body of Mr. York. 8 more bodies are found, skulls crushed, throats cut. Guests at the inn were urged to sit at the place of honor, which was a curtain dividing the house's rooms. While dining, the guest of honor would be hit in the head with a hammer from behind the curtain, his throat cut, and then his body dropped in the trap door to the cellar, Sweeney Todd style. Their motive, robbery, or the thrill of it, nobody actually knows, because despite a reward and several unsubstantial claims of their capture at the hands of various posses, the Benders appear to have gotten away with it, and their grim story continues to intrigue. One of the few mafiastos to be executed is Louis Lepke Butchyalter. Nicknamed Lepkele, Little Louis in Yiddish, then shortened to Lepke, this crime boss was a quiet man for years, managed to avoid public spotlight. In conversations with criminal associates, Lepke preferred listening over talking. He was an overall nice man, appreciated by the community for how he aided his neighbors. He generously compensated his crew members and took them to hockey games, boxing matches, and even winter cruises. He married a widower named Betty and adopted Betty's child from the previous marriage. In the early 1930s, Lepke created an effective process of performing contract killings for the Cosa Nostra mobsters. It had no name, but the press 10 years later called it Murder Inc. The Cosa Nostra mobsters wanted to insulate themselves from any connection to these killings. So, Lepke's partner would relay the contract request from the Costra to Lepke, who would assign it to a street member who had no connections with any major crime family. If they were caught, they could not implicate the Costra members in the crime. They were soon completing jobs all over the country for their mobster bosses, grossing over $1 million in profit per year. Ultimately, Lepke is cornered and forced to surrender after 3 years of hiding when the killing of Joseph Rosen, an informant, goes awry. He's tried for the killing of Rosen alongside 3 other murders, and Lepke is found guilty and sentenced to death. He exhausts his 4 appeals, but is executed by electric chair in 1944. You never know your neighbors, especially if they were Inessa, Roman, and their daughters. Inessa, a kindergarten teacher, and Roman, a successful dentist. Together, Inessa's daughters from her first marriage, 25-year-old Victoria, and just shy of legal daughter Anastasia, are responsible for the violent deaths of at least 30 people across southern Russia. Inessa and her family were highly organized, using information from Roman's sister and brother-in-law who had police connections to organize their crimes around police activity. This is because Inessa liked to go after police officers, as one had left her for another woman in the past. And her current husband didn't feel like she was living in the past either? Okay, alright. right. Their victims weren't exclusively police officers, however. The family MO was breaking and entering the houses of sleeping families while they road tripped under the guise of going on monthly camping trips. One victim was a police officer named Ivan, who was killed when he attempted to stop members of the gang from fleeing the scene of the crime. Roman was eventually killed in a bloody standoff with police, and Inessa was arrested. A search of the family home uncovered a slew of weaponry, a complete arsenal. Inessa, Anastasia, and Victoria all confessed to their crimes, the 6-year reign ending. Vladimir Markin, the chief of Russia's equivalent to the FBI, said, "I'm sure that when they were together, one could hardly imagine that they could even plan a crime." It sounds so much more innocent than it is. The Bean Clan. Picturesque Scotland, a land of mystery and rolling dewy fields, glens, and hills that 100% have eyes. That's right, we're talking about the freaks who inspired the nauseating horror movie that we're never gonna forget anytime soon. Back in the 16th century, Alexander Bean and his partner, Black Agnes Douglas, set up home in a hidden sea cave and started popping out babies. Why? I don't know. Why a cave? Again, I don't know. Maybe they just wanted the saltiest and driest sinuses and intercourse ever. Well, the weirdos never left that cave, and they never let any of the kids leave it either. By keeping it in the family, the clan eventually grew to about 45 members, all starting from just the 2. Jobs were hard to come by when you're not part of society and potentially terrifying looking from inbreeding, so why not just murk and eat travelers whenever you're feeling peckish or want a new shirt? That's exactly what they did, operating only at night and retiring to their cave by day where they could enjoy a roasted meal of unfortunate victims and rest like weird hick vampires. Locals had no idea what was going on because they weren't being picked away at like croutons from the veggie tray, and the Bean Clan survived doing this for 25 years, munching down on what's estimated to be about 1,000 people. Naturally, it eventually gets found out by the locals and they decide to do an old-fashioned mob style on this one. They descend on the cave and cut the off the men, followed by their hands and feet, leaving them to bleed to death. Everyone else was burnt alive. I'm sure if they could have, these weirdos would have attended their own massacre just to snack on their own cooking remains. And now the most dysfunctional family in history, the Ptolemies. The last dynasty of Greek Egypt. Their first 3 monarchs of the dynasty were capable, vigorous sorts that did things like build the great library at Alexandria on their weekends off. But from the 4th century forward, it was nightmarish. It's like they were on a game show where you tried to kill as many of your close relatives as you were able, preferably in as painful and public of a way as possible. This is complicated for 2 reasons. 1, they kept the names in the family. Men were always named Ptolemy, and women 9 times out of 10 were called Cleopatra. 2, they kept their seed in the family too, following the Egyptian tradition, brother and sister wed and had children. This means it's not easy to explain who is killing whom. What follows offered is a kind of prose poem compiled of examples dedicated to the most bestial family in history. Alright, so Ptolemy V was the nicest of the later Ptolemy and thoughtfully had his mother's killers ripped apart by a mob. Ptolemy VI fought his own brother for the throne and then married his sister Cleopatra II. Ptolemy IV kills his mom, who had killed her husband for having a love affair with her mother. Ptolemy VIII was a great enemy of Ptolemy VI and the probable killer of Ptolemy VII. He also married Cleopatra II and then began an affair with Cleopatra's daughter, Cleopatra III. So Ptolemy VIII had Ptolemy VI dismembered and the pieces sent to the mother, Cleopatra II. I could keep going, like for hours. They burned, cooked, eviscerated, literally anything you can think of, they did to one another. All of this comes down to the bottom of the family tree, Cleopatra VII, the daughter of Ptolemy XII, the famous Caesar-loving, Mark Antony-loving Cleopatra who blew Egypt out of the water. I need a water break after that.
Number 10, the Kennedys. For the older folks at home, this is going to be no surprise, but for the younger audience such as myself, let me explain. The Kennedys were a wealthy and powerful family in the US. A lot of their scandals originating from organized crime, American politics, and some juicy rumors. The most famous Kennedy being JFK. My generation knows him from Call of Duty Black Ops 1. Remember 5? It was a good zombies map. The older generation remembers him for that one Sunday car trip in Dallas. You know what I'm talking about. He may have also been shacking up with Marilyn Monroe. His father was a bootlegger during the Prohibition era, and his family seems to have a lot of plane crashes for some reason. I'm not sure why. The Kennedys are textbook scandalous and will be talked about for a long time to come. Number 9, the Jacksons. As much as I love fame and fortune, and baby, Chetty's all about that, I wanted to be famous ever since I was a tubby kid, and I'm slowly getting there too. Nice. I don't think I'll ever reach the same level as Michael Jackson. Seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if the first aliens that we meet know the moonwalk. Not because they're from outer space, but because the reach of Michael Jackson knows no bounds. Starting with the Jackson 5 in the 70s and rising to stardom and becoming the biggest star of the 80s and 90s. In the 2000s too. Growing up, he was pretty popular. Multiple allegations of misconduct don't look good on anyone. even for the king of pop though. He's got a few things stacked against him. Number 8, the Trumps. The billionaire extraordinaire turned POTUS is not shy from scandal. And I'm not talking about during his presidency either. I ain't gonna touch that. Some younger folks may not remember Donald Trump from the 80s and 90s, where he was arguably more famous. After getting a small loan of $1 million, built his real estate empire and perhaps broke a few laws and or using legal loopholes to get what he wanted. I mean, can you really trust the guy that slashed his name on everything? Trump Hotel, Trump Airlines, Trump Board Game. And that's just him, I guess.
No pep in his servant steps for sure. It's Pepe. So, Pepe the First kills the game. He does a great job ruling Egypt. He initiated the policy of intensive penetration of Nubia, south of the First Nile Cataract. Inscriptions record journeys southward early in his reign, and fragments of vessels bearing the king's name were excavated in Karma. Meanwhile, Pepe II is the longest running Egyptian monarch, surviving 94 years on the throne. He's also believed to be the youngest ruler ever in Egyptian history. Pepe II was the son of Pepe I, obviously, and was born late into his father's reign. While he was still very young, he succeeded his half-brother Marine, who died at an early age. His mother served as regent for a number of years, and the old group of officials serving the royal family maintained the kingdom's stability. During the first half of his rule, he brought prosperity and grandeur to Egypt. Second half? Nowhere close. You see a sharp decline of the old kingdom as economic disarray is caused by him virtually having no oversight. Powerful provincial nobles drew talent away from the capital, and because of the unusually long reign of the king, Egypt had a senile ruler when it needed vigorous leadership. Those of Pepe's children who survived him had brief ephemeral reigns and failed to cope with the political and economic crisis that arose as the 6th dynasty ended. His tomb may be more famous than he is. Menkaures. His tomb, the Pyramid of Menkaure, is one of 3 pyramids of Giza, alongside his statue triads that show the king together with his wives and various deities. It's the smallest of the 3 main pyramids of Giza, just 62 meters tall, but has one of the most complex and best preserved structures. He had 2 wives, both are his sisters naturally, and they didn't have much luck with sons at first. 3 in total and 1 daughter. At his death, his successor, his son, Shafashkek, completed the stonework walls of the mortuary temple in brick. Menaku was not succeeded by his eldest son, who actually predeceased him, but rather by Shepsake, a younger son. Shepsake built a monumental mastaba at the South Accra and was the only kingdom ruler to not build a pyramid. This family's work, especially the Great Pyramids, show a great mastery of monumental stoneworking. Individual blocks were large or colossal and were extremely accurately fitted. They were good, and then they were great, and then they were absolute trash. The Amenhotep. Alright, so on the top of the bucket we got Amen I. He's the great-great-granddaddy. He effectively extended Egypt's boundaries into Nubia. Next is great-granddaddy Amen II, who was an army leader with famous archery and battle skills. Supposedly he was able to shoot arrows straight through a thick of copper plates. His athletic ability was incredible, and he was known to have rowed a ship faster than 200 of Egypt's strongest navy men. Next is Granddaddy Amen III, who built himself endless monuments and temples. Perhaps his most famous construction was the Temple of Luxor in Thebes. This temple has become one of the grandest and most famous temples in Egypt. His diplomatic relations allowed art and culture to flourish, and his building projects are legendary. And then there's disastrous daddy Akhenaten, or Amen IV. This nutcase was obsessed with the sun god Atum and changed his name, appearance, politics, lifestyle, anything he could to feel closer to his lord. This pharaoh was so hated that Egyptians themselves wiped his name from their history. He moved Egypt's capital from Thebes to Amarna and then renamed it in Egyptian to mean the horizon of Aten, and then ordered a new capital city be built there, moving an estimated 20,000 people over to make it. When he enforced monotheism, Og failed to realize that the temples of Egypt were the nation's socio-economic cultural hubs, who was the god priest that oversaw all of their industries. So without them, those pillars of the communities were just gone. And stripping these temples of authority, he caused Egypt's biggest reception. And then we've got the bottom of the bucket, we have our boy Tukmahad, aka King Tut, who by his 3rd year changed his name to Tukmahad and issued decree restoring temples, images, personnel, and privileges of the old gods to undo what his dad had done. He also began the protracted process of restoring the sacred shrines of Amun, which had been severely damaged during his father's rule. No proscription or persecution of Aton, though, Akhenaten's god, was undertaken, and royal vineyards and regiments of the army were still named after Aton. Tukmahad unexpectedly died in his 19th year. Whatever the case, he died without designating an heir. This is another 4-part family tree. First, great-granddaddy Sneferu founds the 4th dynasty and marries the daughter of the last pharaoh of the 3rd empire, thus helped to solidify his possession as the pharaoh of the new dynasty, as well as secure Khufu's place in the line of succession. Meanwhile, his son, who becomes Granddaddy Khufu, pops out the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Apparently, we were so impressed by this that we forgot to write anything else about him or why he did this, because we know very little about Khufu. We know he reigned 23 years between 2500 and 2566, and we know he married his sister. Shocker. Khufu traded for highly rare items, prizing both construction materials and precious materials like copper and turquoise, and so he developed the mining industry in Egypt. Limestone and granite were also quarried in vast amounts for rather large building projects that he was working on. Built over a period of 27 years, the Great Pyramid is undoubtedly Khufu's greatest legacy. Khufu's children include 9 sons and 6 daughters, including Defreya and Khafre, who would both become pharaohs following his death. When in power, his son Defreya moved 8 kilometers north of Giza and established a new necropolis on a higher leveled ground. Defreya's pyramid was quarried for its stone, and as such, there's very little of it left standing today. Meanwhile, the underson Khafre succeeded the short-lived Radifi and married his sister and 2 other queens who were probably his sisters. Best known for his pyramid, one of the 3 Great Pyramids of Giza, and also best known for the Sphinx, which bears his likeness on its face. And who else but the Ramses clan? The Ramses I gets the throne in a super uneventful way. He was friend and confidant to the former pharaoh who didn't have a single heir. Then Ramses spent all of his free time marrying all 4 of his daughters. Meanwhile, his son, Seti I, led a great army of 60,000 men and fought in many battles north of Palestine and Syria. King Ramesses II, son of Seti I, was able to finish his father's work by beating the Hittite army in Battle of Kadesh and creating the first documented peace treaty in history. Ramses II went on to declare himself a god and rule Egypt for 67 years before dying of natural causes at 90, which is insane in an era where life expectancy was 30. But before getting to that ripe old age, Ramses spent any free time he had chasing anything with 2 feet and a heartbeat, enough to sire 100 to 200 children in his lifetime. He even outlived 12 of his own sons, leaving no heir. They're back again, the Ptolemies! People loved learning about this batch of literal bastards in the recent top 10 powerful families in history you didn't want to mess with video. Apparently y'all like when I'm doing tongue twisters. For those who don't know why this family could be a tongue twister, an important note is that they always recycled the family names. Men always named Ptolemy, and women always named Cleopatra or Berenice. They also happen to really take the old Egyptian ideology of royals only being with other royals a little too seriously. What's created is a massive family tree, one full of manipulation, contempt, scandal, and brash killings. While the Ptolemies started off strong, building the Library of Alexandria, compiled a star catalog and the earliest surviving table of trigonomic function, and establishing mathematically that an object is and its mirror image must make an equal angles to be a mirror. After the 4th, however, the family became like the Kardashians, talentless and messy. They took up everybody's time, but nobody stopped the free entertainment. So, like last time, let me limber up and I'll run us through some of the notorious BS. Ptolemy IV killed his mother, who had killed her husband, who was having a love affair with her mother, and then married his sister Arinso III, who was then later killed after Ptolemy IV died. Ptolemy XII annoyed his children so much, particularly his daughter Berenice IV, that they rebelled against him and drove him from Egypt. Berenice IV ruled briefly. She probably had her sister killed. She certainly had her husband strangled, who wasn't a family member. She was beheaded on the orders of her father. Ptolemy XII. Ptolemy XIV was the younger brother of Cleopatra VII, that's the Mark Antony one, and possibly poisoned by that same sister. Ptolemy VII was then killed by his uncle, the next Ptolemy VIII, at a wedding feast, or he may have been killed by his own father, Ptolemy IV. Scholars disagree. It's so messy, my mouth's so dry. Let's go on to the next one. Our favorite bearded lady was part of this family. It's the Thutmose line. Granddaddy Thutmose I became king after Amenhotep died without an heir. Probably one of the previous monarch's generals, he came to the throne around age 40 and is thought to have ruled for a little over 10 years. Historians have generally described Thutmose II as a frail and ineffectual, just the sort of person that a purposely shrewish Hatshepsut could push around. Public monuments, however, depict a dutiful Hatshepsut standing appropriately next to her husband. Wife to Tut II, Hatshepsut failed in the more important duty of producing a son. So when Thut II died young in 1497, yet again, the throne went to a harem child. Duly named Thutmose 3, this child was destined to become one of the great warrior kings of Egypt, but at the time of his father's death, he was too young to take the rule. As widow, Hot became regent leader until Thut came of age. Within a few years, however, she proclaimed herself pharaoh, a vile absurd. And in the 7 years past that point, she'd taken up cross-dressing imagery. Once depicted as slim and graceful queen, is now full-blown, flail and crook-wielding king with the broad, bare chest of a man and the pharaoh false beard, but also still long flowing hair and feminine features. Upon Hot's death in 1458, her stepson, then likely in his early 20s, finally ascended to the throne. Thutmose III was a skilled warrior who brought Egypt's empire to the zenith of its power by conquering all of Syria and crossing the Euphrates. The spoils from his many wars made Thutmose III the richest man in the world. His military accomplishments are recorded on the numerous monuments he built himself.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Murdochs. With the high profile of this ongoing case, coupled with the fact that Netflix just released a chilling documentary about the story of this family, it is likely that you may already have quite the idea of who the Murdoch family is. Taylor and I have been watching the documentary series. We're past the first few episodes, and man, is this story wild. A few years ago, if someone asked you who the Murdoch family was, you would have likely described them as one of the most powerful families in South Carolina, with a legal dynasty that has spanned for a century. Now, if I asked you that same question, the answer would be a family who had it all: money, power, status. But some of the members flew a little too close to the sun, tragedy ensued, and now people have lost their lives and the family has been destroyed. It started back in 2015 with the death of Stephen Smith. It carries on to 2018 when Gloria Satterfield, a long-serving employee for the family, was found passed away after a quote trip and fall accident. These events are both horrible and completely atrocious, but despite the rumors, mysteries, and alleged conspirators of these deaths, things really started to unravel for the family in February of 2019 with the death of Mallory Beach. The young woman met her untimely fate after a boating accident where, allegedly, 19-year-old Paul Murdoch was at the wheel, intoxicated. We could spend hours and hours talking about this family and all of these cases and the conspiracies, but we're short for time, which brings me right to the most recent tragedy: the 2021 killings of that same Murdoch who was driving the boat, as well as the killing of his mother, Margaret. Now, I do believe that people are innocent until proven guilty, but it is important to note that the one on trial for these killings right now is the father and husband to the deceased, Alex Murdoch, the patriarch of the family who is supposed to be carrying on that Murdoch legacy. The stories surrounding this family are horrific, tragic, and a reminder of the dangers that money and power can bring. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Sacklers. This family is the one behind the dynasty of Purdue Pharma, who is best known for producing an exceptionally strong prescription painkiller. Of course, we all know just how big and rich a pharmaceutical company could get, especially one that has been around for quite some time. The company was first created in 1952 by 3 Brooklyn-born brothers, and in the beginning, the company mostly dealt in things like laxatives and earwax removal methods. Soon, things for the company took quite an upwards turn, and before anyone knew it, the family was regarded as one of the most esteemed New York families, but they were also known for their philanthropic tendencies, with their names on museums and hospitals, some of the most famous in the world. You see, the thing is, when they released this painkiller in 1995, it led to them amassing an insane $13 billion fortune. That is obviously incredible, but the trouble came when it was realized that this painkiller wasn't nearly as potent as it was marketed to be, and frequent users would be building up a tolerance to it, meaning they needed to use higher and higher dosages. Viewer, welcome to the opioid crisis. Basically, this all spiraled out of control and led to many lawsuits coming against Purdue Pharma, not only by individuals, but by January 2019, 36 states were suing the company for what the painkiller had done to their citizens. After 2 years of deliberations, the Sacklers finally reached a deal with plaintiffs in bankruptcy court in September of 2021. As part of their Chapter 11 proposal, they agreed to pay $4.5 billion and give up all ownership of the company in exchange for complete immunity and all future opioid liability. Despite this fall from grace, the Sacklers were able to move an alleged $1.36 billion into offshore accounts, so despite their bankruptcy filing and the large sum of money handed over, they will continue to retain quite a large amount of their personal wealth. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Bakers. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were once the most famous televangelists in America, and they certainly were living in quite a lap of luxury. They had beautiful homes, expensive cars, and a ton of money, but that quickly came crashing down down amid horrendous scandal. In the late 1980s, after much success, Jim Bakker resigned from the PTL ministry after there was a cover-up to hide some hush money that had been given to church secretary Jessica Hahn over an alleged SA situation. Of course, not necessarily a surprise, but definitely not a good look for a televangelist. This led to more interest in people looking into the family more, and soon it was uncovered that there was some sort of accounting fraud going on as well. The consequences for this came by way of felony charges, conviction, imprisonment, and divorce. That was the end of that legacy, but since serving his time, Jim Bakker hasn't exactly slowed down. He not only remarried and returned to televangelism, but he also currently hosts the Jim Bakker Show, which focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products. So, that's interesting.
Number 7. Robert the Evil Doll. Hey, for starters, this doll only looks vaguely human. His nub of a nose looks like a pair of pinholes, and he's covered in brown little nicks, like scars. His eyes are beady and black, and combined with his malevolent smirk, it's terrifying to look at. Clasped in his lap, he's holding his own toy, a dog with disproportionate eyes and a too big tongue falling out of its mouth. The doll originally belonged to Robert Eugene Otto, an artist described as, well, eccentric. Neighbors of Robert used to hear him having a conversation with the doll, and this continued into his adult years. He brought it everywhere, and talked about it in the first person as if it weren't a doll, which I know might sound kinda batty, but it's the best way to deal with cursed objects. Trust me, I'm talking from experience. The doll remained stored in the Otto family home until Robert passed away in 1974. After his death, a couple bought the house, and their 8-year-old found the doll in the attic. The young girl often claimed that the doll was trying to kill her, and it's now on display in a museum in Key West and is still believed to curse people. His last caretaker before the museum experienced him disappear and reappear as he pleased, along with hearing footsteps and giggling in the attic. Some claimed Robert's expression changed when anybody badmouthed Otto in his presence. Oh, and he's been responsible for a few car crashes, some divorces, and broken bones. So, good Robert, good doll, please. I don't need to be cursed. My life's crazy enough as it is. Number 6, another Ouija board incident. The story of Mark and his family's eerie encounter with a cursed Ouija board infested home in Australia is nothing short of a supernatural roller coaster. At first, subtle signs emerged, like their dog's reluctance to enter the house, which was dismissed as, a mere adjustment to the new environment. But things quickly escalated. Mysterious flooding in the laundry room, shattered light bulbs, and an overwhelming sense of unease in certain areas of the house signaled something far more sinister. The disembodied laughter, shuffling feet, and phantom voices only intensified their torment. Even visiting relatives experienced the unnerving phenomena firsthand. What's truly chilling is the revelation about the previous renter's involvement in seances and a messy divorce, possibly leaving behind a trail of spiritual chaos. Possibly. Maybe. Mark's mother's decision to consult a local pastor led to a grim revelation of multiple demonic entities lurking in their home. As the supernatural disturbances grew unbearable, the family decided to take action. The mom's brave confrontation with the paranormal, reading Bible verses aloud, was met with the spirit's fury, resulting in potential poltergeist activity. The climax of this terrifying tale came when the youngest member of the family miraculously survived a fall from an open window. This event was the final straw, prompting them to flee the cursed house without looking back. Once again, not to sound like a broken record, leave Ouija boards alone. Please. Number 5, a cursed painting. Technically, this item cursed enough households to be a top 10 list of its own, which is a nightmare for my brain. The tale of the Crying Boy painting is a chilling example of the inexplicable, a bizarre intersection of art and the supernatural that unfolded in the 1970s and 1980s. Bob Smith's childhood fascination with the seemingly, innocent painting turned into a haunting mystery when a kitchen fire devastated his grandmother's house, leaving only the painting unscathed. The eerie connection deepened when Bob later learned that the very same painting had caused similar tragedies in other households. Giovanni Bregolin's series of paintings, of which the Crying Boy was a part, became notorious. In 1985, the Sun newspaper in the UK published a shocking account of Megan Ron Hall, whose home was consumed by fire, with only the cursed painting surviving unharmed. What's truly unsettling is the firefighters' claim that he had witnessed multiple house fires, where everything was reduced to ashes except for copies of The Crying Boy. The widespread reports of similar incidents fueled the belief in the painting's curse, leading to a wave of fear and destruction. Ultimately, the Sun's bonfire of these paintings marked the end of their popularity, but a few copies still linger, carrying with them the ominous aura of the inexplicable. So, if you have one, burn it. Number 4, a conjuring book. In this perplexing case, the Foster family found themselves entangled with quite the evil artifact. Yep, a book to conjure evil things that, if you haven't guessed it already, brought malevolent forces into their home. The eerie events began when Lorraine Warren received a mysterious call from a Mrs. Sandy Foster in the middle of the night, only to have the phone connection mysteriously severed. The following day, Lorraine visited the Fosters and learned of the disturbing occurrences plaguing their household. Meg, the daughter, had unwittingly invited dark spirits by dabbling in the occult, and the family experienced a series of terrifying events. I'm talking the classic Faucets turned on by themselves, phantom footsteps echoed throughout the house, and strange lights and sounds plagued their nights. So, go Ed and Lorraine, they stepped in to confront the menacing presence. They discovered that Meg's bedroom was a hub of occult activities. They discovered that Meg's bedroom was quite the hub of occult activities, containing black conjuring candles, occult vestments, and ritual books. Ruh-roh. They sealed the room, removing the sinister artifacts, and as they worked to dispel the evil, they encountered a chilling telepathic feeling of dread and an inexplicable force preventing them from ascending any kind of stairs. Despite these challenges, Ed and Lorraine persevered. With holy water and prayers, they successfully cleansed the house of the malevolent entities. The case serves as a haunting reminder of the dangers of dabbling in the occult and potential consequences of summoning forces beyond human comprehension. See? I told y'all. Don't summon beings. Number 3, the Snedeker family rosary beads. As you might have expected, this true story begins in the witching hour, in the wee small hours of the morning. One night, very late at night, Ed and Lorraine were contacted by the family, who had just moved into a house on Meriden Avenue in Southington. Specifically, the mother of the family unit and a niece who came to stay with the family were on the phone. What they found and thought they bought was a big and seemingly welcoming home. But what they didn't know was that it was a former funeral home. Oh, and fun fact, the morticians at the funeral home were allegedly involved in necrophilia, or performing schmex acts with corpses. What used to be the showroom for the coffins was now the young person's room, and just down the hall from that, the place where the bodies were prepared for viewing. So the young boys were the first to start talking about the things that they had seen and experienced, saying they were terrified, and the parents chastised them at first for it, but they were so scared they started sleeping on the floor in the living room. Among the sounds the boys would hear were the sound of chains pulling the coffin upstairs. Only thing was, there was no more coffins. So the woman who called the Warrens were terrified, and with the niece in a small bedroom in the back of the house, and the covers on her bed were levitating around her, like there was a fan blowing them around. No big. And Lorraine said that while the mom was on the phone with her, even more bizarre events started happening. The mother had rosary beads in her hand, and while she spoke, the beads were actually being pulled apart and falling to the floor. So Ed and Lorraine went over the next morning with the family's parish priest. A blessing of the house seemed to do nothing to calm things down, so that's when the Warrens decided to call the bishop's office. Eventually sent an exorcist, which seemed to do the trick. But not before one last hurrah from whatever was believed to be haunting the house, because demons don't like to give up without a fight. There was a huge tree in front of the house, and half of the tree, with no wind, broke off and fell on the property. The family moved a short time later, and Ed and Lorraine kept the rosary beads that had been pulled apart, because if a demonic spirit can touch a Catholic relic, that's just a really bad thing. Number 2, Bathsheba's jewelry box. Soon after the Perron family moved into what they thought was a really fun home, strange occurrences began to unravel, initially dismissed as minor inconveniences. We're talking brooms moved on their own, and the young daughters started seeing apparitions. Carolyn Perron, determined to uncover the truth, delved into the history of the house and discovered a lineage plagued by mysterious and tragic deaths spanning 8 generations. The most ominous presence was that of Bathsheba Sherman, a woman associated with witchcraft. Bathsheba's malevolent intentions became evident as the family's life spiraled into a nightmare. One harrowing incident involved Carolyn experiencing an inexplicable puncture wound on her calf, resembling a large sewing needle impalement. This unsettling occurrence was just one of the many tormenting episodes endured by the Perron family over their decade-long residency in the house. Thankfully, the Warrens got summoned to help the family, and they identified a cursed artifact, a mysterious box, which they believed acted as a conduit for the evil energy afflicting the household. So they took it with them. End of story. Thank goodness. Number 1, don't open the box. In Jewish folklore, a dibuk is an evil spirit. Supposedly, a Holocaust survivor accidentally summoned the demon while using a homemade Ouija board, but managed to trap it inside a wine cabinet. Kevin Manis bought the box at an estate sale in 2001 and immediately started having nightmares about an evil hag. Ditto for the friends who stayed with him. He gave the box to his mom, who suffered a stroke on the same day, and later owners have also claimed that the scary thing has appeared in their nightmares as well. Thankfully, at some point, the owner contacted local rabbis, sealed the demon back in the box, and then hid it from the world. Thank goodness.
Alright, so the Cambiuses are up first. Cambius was the son of Cyrus I and the successor of his father in Anshan as the king of Agistius of Media. According to the 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus, Cambius married a daughter of Astidius, by whom he became the father of Cyrus II. Cambius II, aka Cyrus II, performed the ritual duties of the Babylonian king at the important New Year festival of 538 and of 530. Before Cyrus set out on his last campaign, he was appointed the regent in Babylon. That campaign was the conquest of Egypt, planned by Cyrus, and was a major achievement of Cambius's reign once captured. This is the lunatic who liked to torture animals for entertainment and notoriously killed the Apis bull to torment the Greeks who worshipped it. Cambius was traveling through Syria on his way back to Persia when he first heard reports of a revolt there, and then he died mysteriously in Syria in the summer of 522, either by his own hand or as the result of an accident. continent. This is one of the few Persian families to have held the throne, the Xerxes line. First we have the granddaddy Xerxes I, or the Great as titled by the 5th Persian king. He was the son of Darius the Great, and his reign lasted from 486 BC to 465 BC. He's well known in history for his attempted invasion of Greece and how later in the same year he was defeated in the Battle of Salamis, which led him to flee his own kingdom. He's known as both a Persian ruler and a pharaoh, as when he ruled Egypt it was also part of the Persian Empire. Little is known about the last years of Xerxes' life. After his reversal in Greece, he withdrew into himself and allowed himself to be drawn into his harem intrigues, in which he was in fact only a pawn. Thus, he disposed of his brother's entire family at the demand of the queen. He was assassinated by his own commander of the royal bodyguard forces. Another son, Artaxerxes I, succeeded in retaining power. Artaxerxes I was given the throne by the commander of the guard, Artabanus, who had killed Xerxes. It's fine though, cause Xerxes Jr. got his daddy's lick back when he kills Arta about a month later. His reign, though generally peaceful, was disturbed by several insurrections, the first of which was the revolt of his brother. During his reign, Artaxerxes completed the Hall of 100 Columns at Persepolis, rebuilt the palace of Darius I at Susa after a fire, and Artaxerxes died of natural causes in 424 BCE, having ensured a peaceful succession by naming Xerxes II his legitimate heir. Xerxes II reigned for only a little over a month, however, before he was assassinated. Next is the Dosier line. Starting with Dasi Dajir from the Second Kingdom, Egypt's 3rd dynasty. He undertook the construction of the earliest important stone buildings in Egypt. His reign, which probably lasted 19 years, was marked by great technological innovation in the use of stone architecture. The innovative structure was a departure from the traditional use of mud bricks alongside stone. The greatest advance, however, was the completion of alteration of the shape of a monument from a flat-topped rectangular structure known as a mastaba to a 6-stepped pyramid. This great character built the famous pyramid and set up the construction mechanisms of large buildings, paving the way for successors of their kingdom for even more daring constructions. The Pyramid of Dosier is the first pyramid in history of ancient Egypt and therefore potentially all of humanity. It is a degree pyramid that is at the center of a funerary complex of great importance. It's located in the necropolis of Saqqara. Sekhmet is probably the brother or eldest son of King Dosier. Little is known about this king since he ruled for only a few years. However, he erected a step pyramid at Saqqara and left behind a well-known rock inscription at the Wadi Makhara.
In our number 7 spot today we have Prince Sado. Born in 1735, Prince Sado was the heir to the Korean throne, but unfortunately he would go on to suffer from extreme mental illness and delusions. Thankfully for historians and those of us interested in history, the wife of the prince created memoirs, and in them she detailed the horrifying things that happened next. The prince began to kill. He began to hurt and torment people. He basically turned their home into a house of horrors. The prince also endured some pretty horrific treatment from his own father, which of course is not an excuse for the things he did, but it definitely did not help the scenario. Eventually, the family had enough and realized that his behavior would go on to ruin the name of their family forever, so something needed to be done. At the time, tradition stated that if the prince were to be executed, his wife and child would also need to be, but everyone thought that maybe that was a bit too far. Why should they have to pay for his crimes? This led to the king coming up with quite the bizarre workaround for this. On a hot day in July, the king forced the prince to step into a rice chest, which was then locked behind him. This acted as a way to make it seem like he had caused his own death, which is said to have occurred just a few days later. In our number 6 spot today we have Don Carlos. This little troublemaker never made it to the title of king, but he sure was a little too close for comfort when you hear about the kinds of things he was doing. Carlos was the Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, as he was the eldest son of King Philip II of Spain. It is said that Carlos may have had some troubles right from birth, which many believe could be due to inbreeding that was common in the family at the time. Descriptions of his behaviors, though, are far worse than what anyone could have expected. It is said that Carlos did horrible things like hurting or taking the lives of animals for fun. Nowadays we call that a huge warning sign for potential killers. Back then it was like, I don't know, was anybody even watching you, really? It is even said that at one point he purposefully blinded all of the horses in the royal stable. Soon, of course, his cruelties would extend to humans, with people claiming that one time he chose to harm a servant girl for no reason other than because he could. Major King Joffrey vibes in that one. And apparently one time he made a shoemaker eat a pair of shoes that he had made that the prince didn't like. He was just a little twerp. Carlos was set up by his family to marry the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided that there was absolutely no way in hell. Like, he was so bad that she would rather marry his dad. Which she did in 1560. In the end, Carlos was found to be plotting to take out his own father, which landed him in prison in solitary confinement, where he passed away 6 months later. In our number 5 spot today, we have Prince John. It is said that this may be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecies surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and very early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although that is of course impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a really sad thought. In our number 4 spot today, we have Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy. This is a royal scandal that took place all the way back in 1314, and it starts off with the daughters-in-law of King Philip IV of France. I think that's the 4th. Here's hoping. These young women, Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, were accused of having quite a scandalous affair with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gautier. So this already is some hot tea, but apparently when Queen Isabella of England, who is the daughter of King Philip of France, so I guess like sisters-in-law with these ladies, when she heard these stories, apparently she's the one who totally outed their affairs. It was obviously a huge deal, and both of the women admitted to their adultery. This led to them being pretty much erased from public knowledge. They had their hair cut short and they were thrown in a dungeon, and even though Marguerite was meant to be the Queen of France through her marriage, when her husband ascended the throne, she stayed locked in the dungeon until the marriage could be annulled. Little is known about what happened to either of them after this point. However, it is believed that Marguerite passed away in 1315 and Blanche 1326. As for the men in this affair, well, they met quite a gruesome fate that involved the removal of their bits and pieces before their swift execution. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Duggars. Alright, one of the most famous reality TV families, and even before the horrors of this family came to light, they were already a family that had fame due to quite a strange reason. If you're unfamiliar with who the Duggars are, you might be more familiar with the show that they used to have on TLC titled 19 Kids and Counting. Yeah, the show ran on TLC for 7 years until it was cancelled in 2015, and the show featured, well, the Duggar family. The family consisted of parents Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and their 19 children, 9 daughters and 10 sons, all of whose names begin with the letter J. It was an interesting time, and they seemed like this huge, happy, religious family, but in the years since the cancellation of the show, some horrifying things came to light. Initially, the reason that TLC suspended and then subsequently cancelled the show is because it came to light that the eldest son in the family, Josh, had done some horrible things and acted violently, horrendously, and inexcusably against a number of girls, even some in his own family. Due to the popularity of the show before these serious stories came to light, there was a spin-off show that was created titled Counting On. This show first aired in December 2015 and stayed on the air for a surprising number of years before it was pulled, and the family yet again found themselves in the center of a scandal that had to do with Josh. This time he was caught in possession of a certain kind of tape that no one should have, and that should not even exist at all. I can't say which kind of tape, but just know it's the worst of the worst. worst. These are, of course, some of the worst scandals that have surrounded the family, but truly, it's only a drop in the bucket of the many stories surrounding them. In our number 2 spot today, we have King Juan Carlos. The former King Juan Carlos of Spain, when he first ascended the throne in 1975, was highly looked upon. He was said to be bringing a new age for the country, an age of democracy. His reign lasted for quite a while, but by the time 2014 rolled around, he was forced to abdicate the throne. This was due to a few reasons. Firstly, his public ratings started to plummet after word spread of him being a bit of a womanizer and after an explosive affair, but also because of a lavish elephant hunting trip he took in the middle of an economic collapse. Okay? Fair enough, I can see why people were getting their guard up a bit. So the king abdicated the throne in favor of his son Philippe, who sits on it to this day. During this time, however, the scandals in the family weren't only to do with Juan Carlos. In January of 2014, another of his children, his daughter Infanta Cristina, was charged with tax fraud. She has since been acquitted, that happened in 2017, but she was stripped of her title as the Duchess of Palma de Mallorca, and this whole deal had her leaving Spain and moving to Switzerland. The drama doesn't end here, however, because her husband actually was convicted in the case with charges that included embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, and he received prison time in 2018. In the end, none of the fraud charges have ever been linked back to the former king, but this entire debacle did cause the former ruler to move out of Spain. With his move came a letter, part of which read, quote, "Guided by the conviction to perform the best service to the Spanish people, their institutions, and you as king, I am communicating my thoughtful decision to move at this time outside of Spain. A decision I make with sadness, but with great serenity. I have been king of Spain for almost 40 years, and during all of them I have always wanted the best for Spain and for the crown." In our number 1 spot today, we have the Rothschilds. This family is easily one of the most, if not the most, powerful family in the modern era. In fact, it is said that most of us in the Western world don't even realize the impact this family has had on our lives, as our consumer-driven lifestyle is definitely directly related to the monetary systems this family put in place. This would include the United States Federal Reserve. Because of this insane amount of money and power that this family has held for over a century, there are plenty of conspiracy theories going on surrounding them. The conspiracies run deep, and they go quite dark. They touch on everything from assassination attempts, some successfully completed on sitting presidents, to heinous World War II agendas that would have benefited the family. Of course, they are conspiracies, so no one is quite sure which of these secrets, if any, are true. Even still, the stories and speculations swirl today, waiting for some piece of evidence to maybe bring them to light.
Number 10. The Donovan Family Ouija Board. In the eerie case of the Donovan household, we witness the harrowing consequences of dabbling with the supernatural. Patty Donovan's innocent curiosity led her down a treacherous path when she engaged with, yep, a Ouija board, the thing I hate the most, believing she had found a friend and a spirit. As she grew emotionally dependent on this entity, the disturbing incidents began to unfold. The malevolent spirit, once her confidant, or boyfriend, turned into a malevolent force, turned into quite the force, wreaking havoc on her family. It targeted their vehicles, disassembling engines and puncturing tires, leaving them vulnerable and stranded. The spirit's actions escalated with vandalism around their home and inexplicable damage to their property, even to the point of furniture levitating and rocks raining down on their house. It's kind of baffling that the family didn't connect the dots sooner, seeing as the signs of, chaos became increasingly apparent and obvious. Her dad, Ted Donovan's desperation led him to seek help from our favorite paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Upon their arrival, they sensed a pervasive malevolence within the home, and the family's history with the Ouija board was finally revealed. The Warrens, realizing the gravity of the situation, initiated the process for an exorcism, which took a painfully long month to be granted. In the meantime, the entire family endured more torment and destruction at the hands of the malevolent entities. Finally, on May 2nd, the exorcism took place, liberating the family from their demonic ordeal. However, they were left with a substantial financial burden due to the extensive damages inflicted upon their home. Let this be a lesson to you all. Please, 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 leave Ouija boards alone. Please. Number 9. The Woodruff family. So this incident happened in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and in a home built in 1796 by General David Bradford on top of a former burial ground, so brace yourselves. Our story begins with a newly married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Clark Woodruff. Mr. Woodruff was a cruel and harmful man and owned numerous slaves, which was the icky norm at the time, and one in particular that he liked to punish went by the name of Chloe. Now, Chloe tried to protect herself from the wrongful punishments by listening in on the Woodruff's conversations and modifying her behavior, which Hey, that's brilliant. Sadly though, one day after being caught eavesdropping, Clark had one of Chloe's ears cut off. The painful experience would stay with Chloe and inspire her to make plans for revenge. On the 9th birthday of the Woodruff's daughter, Chloe placed poisonous oleander leaves into the cake, intending to only get the family sick so she could nurse them back to health and, earn a favor with the family. Tragically, the dose was lethal, and it ended up killing the missus and the offspring. Now, while Chloe was punished fatally by the other slaves and her ghost haunts the home, the mirror in the front hall is cursed and has the spirits of Sarah and her 2 descendants trapped inside of it. People who look into the mirror ever since have reported feeling a sense of dread that stays with them past their visit, experiencing horrid thoughts and more. Look, I'm on Team Smash the Thing, even though I know that would technically make the world worse. So maybe just stick it in a closet somewhere, because it's just messing with every other family. Number 8, Annabelle. Am I biased because Annabelle has always been my favorite demonic artifact? Absolutely I am. Donna and Angie were student nurses and good friends who had decided to room together while in school. And for Donna's 28th birthday, her mom had gifted her a very large Raggedy Ann doll, something she was thrilled about. Hey, personally, I'd react the same way. Let the record know that I'm always down to accept gifts of dolls or plushies. Soon after adopting the precious doll though, Donna started to notice some weird behavior. She would leave Annabelle on her bed every morning behind her locked bedroom door, seeing her the same way with her arms and legs crossed, and would come home at night to Annabelle having moved rooms and in positions that weren't possible. She's described a few instances of the doll kneeling, and speaking from experience, stuffed dolls can't kneel without falling for more than a few seconds. Donna and Angie then started finding notes left throughout the apartment, written on parchment paper in red pen, 2 things they didn't own. When Donna's boyfriend Lou started criticizing the doll, unexplainable handprints and scratches began appearing on his body. And that's when the girls made the decision to call the priest, who then brought in Ed and Lorraine Warren. They were able to calm down the entity enough to remove it from the home and transport her to the museum, where she resides to this day, but not without a couple of chaos events over the years.
Number 7, the Rockefeller. Donald Trump might have been a billionaire or the most famous billionaire, but I still think J.D. Rockefeller takes the cake, and his family, actually. A little history lesson here. Rockefeller, in a nutshell, was the first modern billionaire. Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark levels of wealth. Seriously, he was pretty rich. When oil and gas became big business in the late 1880s because Industrial Revolution, cars, we need oil, his company, Standard Oil, slowly rose up until they had a monopoly on the oil industry. By cutting out middlemen and cornering the market, he amassed billions. Today, adjusted for inflation, his pockets were lined with a very healthy $23 billion. Say it again, $23 billion. That was all the way back then. Way before Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Buffett did it. I wouldn't mind $23 billion myself. Sounds good, right? Oh, all the McDonald's I could have. Oh yeah. Number 6, the Coppolas. Imagine being a not so well-known director, then Marlon Brando walks in the room and goes, "Let's make a movie." The Godfather, great movie, right? Well, it seems that filmmaking runs in the family. Awesome. A whole family of people involved in film. You gotta love that. I love film, that's awesome. However, for those fans of The Godfather, which if you haven't seen it, please do. It's a masterpiece, go see it. What's not a masterpiece, however, is The Godfather 3. You can skip that one. I can just imagine the look on people's faces when they thought they were going to see a trilogy completed masterfully. It's a real stinker, folks, for many reasons, but a big one is Sofia Coppola, who plays Michael Corleone's daughter in the movie, which in real life is Francis Ford Coppola's daughter, the director of the movie. Imagine taking one of the best movie licenses of all time and almost single-handedly ruining that. Sorry, Dad. Number 5, the Kardashians. Everybody knows the Kardashians. Everybody and everyone knows that they've had tons of scandals. Kim Kardashian being married to Kanye West is just scandal by proxy. Come on, that guy's crazy. She also had a tape that got out. Not her best moment. Mr. Kardashian was a lawyer on the O.J. Simpson case where he may or may not have done it. And of course, Kris Jenner married Bruce Jenner, and who's now the fabulous Caitlyn Jenner, and her daughter was in a weird Pepsi commercial this one time, and this whole list could be about them, honestly. Strangely enough, for people who generally don't have talent in Hollywood, they sure get a lot of press, which at some point is annoying, I'm sure. But be nice, paparazzi, or no Christmas presents. I know Santa Claus, and I'm keeping a list. It's early, but I'm keeping a list this year. Number 4, the Queen. Being the Queen of England is hard, or so I'm told. I mean, it must be kind of nice to sit in a big palace all day, eating cucumber sandwiches, and getting lost in such a big place. I know I would. I would get lost for sure. The royal family, however, are no saints and have their fair share of scandals. Prince Andrew has gotten himself into some trouble in recent tabloids. But for some who don't know, Prince Harry was quite the wild child 20 years ago. A prince on the loose, if you will. Not to mention the whole debacle with Princess Diana. The car accident is a little sus, not gonna lie. Even way back in the day when both world wars were on, there was some minor cover-up to hide the family's German heritage. Kinda hard to fight the Germans when your queens are one of the Germans. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. As long as there's a crown, there's always gonna be scandal. Number 3, Wally World. That's what my family calls Walmart. I don't know, that's just what we call it. The Walmart family is quite wealthy, and tied to the Walmart Corporation, of course. And if you didn't know, Walmart doesn't have a squeaky clean track record. You mean a multi-billion-dollar department store, located in over 20 countries around the world, hasn't been to every rule and law applied to them? I'm shooketh. Not to diss Walmart, I love you guys. You got some good deals there, but there's no way anyone at home hasn't heard horror stories about working there. Come on, I know you're like, yeah, you're thinking about it right now, I know you are. On a more heinous note, Walmart's production methods are uncouth, as they use a version of labor I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. But in short, their clothes are cheaply made and then sold at a huge markup. But because the production was so cheap, you can walk in there and buy a shirt for $15 and you feel like you saved. You feel good. Oh, there's a McDonald's. I'm gonna go there later. Nice. It's great. I love capitalism. It's the best. Number 2, the Genovese. Probably the most infamous crime family to ever exist, or ask for protection money. One of the 5 families of New York, the Genovese family were wise guys, good fellas, tough guys, made men, part of the crew, and like Don Rickles said once, probably sat around all day and smelling their guns. I love Don Rickles. It would be difficult to quantify everything the crime family had going for them. What separates the Italian mafia from everyday hoodlums is that they are organized, hence the name organized crime. Profiteering off anything they could, really. Illicit substances, rackets, scams, gambling, and connections everywhere, really. Watch The Irishman. It's on Netflix. It's a good movie. You'll know what I mean. Hey Frank, what do you want to do later, Frank? Number 1, the Clintons. Hillary, don't come in the room. Probably the grooviest president ever to hold office. Bill Clinton was president around the time I was born, so I'm not that familiar with his politics and policies. And when I think of the late 90s, I think of Nintendo 64, Tony Hawk, and MTV, so it would be difficult for me to talk about that in any way, really. Is the Clinton family a bunch of wealthy American leaders who have some ill-gotten gains and email deleters? Yes, most likely, but you all know why this is number 1, don't you? Did you really think that me, Big Chetty, was going to talk about Clinton and not talk about his impeachment? Being one of only 3 presidents to have that process fully started. Interesting, I didn't know that. What were you guys thinking about? What were you talking about? There's nothing else he did wrong, right? He's innocent, he's good. Who? Monica Lewinsky? Who's that? She did what with his what?
Number 10, Genghis Khan's clan. We know Genghis Khan and his conquest to take over China was no small feat, as it needed the help of his entire clan to help with his takeover. Coming from a small section in Mongolia, they formed together what had been the largest land empire in history. The Mongols always viewed family as the central pillar of society, and Genghis' sons and grandsons extended the empire from the western shores to the Black Sea to the Pacific. And although they seem outnumbered, their military tactics and psychological warfare were noted in constant success against their enemies. If the city and people they plundered surrendered, the Mongols would then treat them fairly and allow them to join in their bounty, but if the people resisted, they would feel the fury of the Khan clan. Despite the brutal acts of destruction, the Khan clan, whomever they inevitably conquered, the lands were actually safe and well controlled, and in many cases even improved from previous conditions. Subjects had personal liberty and had the rights to follow whatever religion they believed in without prejudice. Number 9, the Briley brothers. One of our sibling duos who had no problem committing crimes together starts with the Briley brothers. In 1971, 16-year-old Linwood Briley shot and killed his 57-year-old neighbor, landing him in reform school. This violent episode was a taste of what was to come. From March to October 1979, Linwood and his brother James and Anthony embarked on a bloody hit spree in Richmond, Virginia. With accomplices Duncan Meckins, they robbed and killed at least 11 people. 2 would-be victims would escape unharmed, and they were able to report to authorities of the terrible crimes they saw commit. The brothers continued to leave a trail of terror throughout Richmond, and after they were caught, Linwood and James were sentenced to death. In 1984, the 2 elder brothers escaped death row with 4 other inmates, but were recaptured within 3 weeks. Linwood and James were executed by electric chair in 1984 and 1985 respectively, and Anthony Briley and Duncan Meekins are both still incarcerated. Number 8, Cray twins. In some parts of the world, having twins was considered a rare commodity, and in 1933, during a time where having children, let alone twins, was a prized rarity. Their mother, Violet Ann Lee Cray, was particularly given a slight celebrity status when her twin boys not only survived in their infancy but also were able to survive towards adulthood. Their mother, Violet Annie Lee Cray, was particularly given a slight celebrity status when her twin boys not only survived in infancy but also were able to both be able to survive towards adulthood. Some might even speculate their mother planted seeds of malignant narcissism the twins would later display as adults. Born Ronnie and Reggie Cray were noted as one of the most dangerous twins in London. The twins formed an organized crime gang called The Firm, and these gangsters were particularly active in London, England in the 60s. They were so dangerous due to their massive extortion rackets, armed robbery, arson, protection rackets, gambling, and cold-blooded killings of rival gang members. That's when they were arrested on May 8, 1968. Ronnie ended up being filed as a certified insane person and was committed to a hospital. As for his brother, Reggie was released from prison on compassionate grounds. Both died 5 years apart from the other. Number 7. The Messina Brothers. Speaking of crime families, the Messina Brothers were 5 brothers who led a criminal organization in London from 1930s to the 1950s. The crime was illegal adult work and, of course, trafficking. They operated in the UK, where they took up English names and bought multiple properties throughout the West End. Their father apparently did the same trade of adult work organization and ran brothels and illegal houses, so they followed suit with their father and expanded over the UK. With a steady and highly profitable adult work operation and adequate protections from members of the Metropolitan Police, the Messinas ran unchecked in the city. By the late 1940s, they were operating 30 houses, and the women would hand 80% of their earnings to the brothers, and by 1950s, the police estimated that at least 200 of London's most expensive adult workers were Messina girls. Prosecutions proved difficult as many of the women who worked for them had valid passports, making it harder for them to make a case of either the women or the brothers. Later, they started recruiting local English girls by the age-old technique of giving good-looking girls as a good time and possibly promising of marriage, followed by being induced into, well, adult work. They eventually were caught by the end of the late 1950s, where they all been forced to flee the country. Each brother was charged, and only 4 of the brothers dealt with the authorities, as some were acquitted and others imprisoned, like Eugenio, who received a 6-year sentence. Did lay a foundation for other crime associations and organizations to follow suit as they continue to find loopholes. Number 6. Inessa Tarverdi-Eva and family. Closer to the present day, we have Inessa and her husband Roman and their 2 daughters, Victoria and Anastasia. Anastasia was older than her husband, and Victoria was her daughter from a previous relationship. Anastasia was just 13 years old. For this middle-class family, money was not the motive for the series of killings and robberies that began in 2007. The family took regular camping trips that was a cover for their crimes. They would break into houses, kill any occupants before taking whatever they could find. Often the stuff that they found or took of little value were probably just trophies. Some of the attacks were so gruesome. In one raid, there were only 2 teenage girls in the house. The family tortured them, gouged their eyes out, and finally got rid of them. Because of their relationship with a policeman that had not ended well, Inessa particularly enjoyed killing cops. The authorities finally arrested them in 2013, and we still don't know how many people fell victim to this family. Number 5. Shaka. Gradually expanding his power until he ruled with absolute authority, he had a grasp of tactics that made the Zulu warriors feared by all. He insisted on absolute obedience and would ruthlessly punish anyone who didn't live up to his expectations. Defeated warriors might return to camp to find that Shaka had had their families executed. They would also probably suffer the same fate. People still debate whether or not he was a cruel tyrant or a true father of a proud nation. Regardless, it was his own family who turned on him. After Shaka's mother died, he began to behave erratically. He ordered mourning rituals that made great demands on his people and resulted in hardships for many. He was unfortunately assassinated by his half-brothers in 1828. Most Zulu people today revere him as he was a hard taskmaster, but he gave his people pride in themselves. Number 4. The Mulhall sisters. Linda and Charlotte Mulhall, 30 and 23 respectfully, were the subjects of one of the most intense criminal cases in Ireland's history. One night after being fed up, the women killed and dismembered their mother's boyfriend, Farah Swali Noor, who allegedly physically harmed their mother, and the events leading up to the incident propelled it to the front page as newspapers went into extreme details of the sisters' troubled histories, which include adult work, crime, and illegal substances. On the night of the event, the sister allegedly took ecstasy pills with their mother and the victim. Noor was killed with a sharp object wielded by Charlotte and was struck by a hammer by Linda following a confrontation with the sisters and their mother, Kathleen Mulhall. The subsequent manhunt and the trial in October 2006 attracted intense media attention as the details of the crime slowly emerged. The police were also notified when parts of the victim's leg with a sock still on it was spotted floating down a river 10 days later. The sister and their mother were arrested but released until Linda confessed to the involvement in the crime. The case received a high amount of attention due to the grotesque and macabre nature of this crime. This led to the sisters being dubbed as the Scissor Sisters by the media. Number 3, the Savalaski twins. Called the Killer Twins, this duo basically grew up committing crimes together. It started when they were young and would challenge each other to steal bigger and bigger things until they got older and the dares got more extreme. So extreme to the point where one of the brothers killed a store owner in 1971 while his brother was serving time in jail. Robert's life fell apart. He became addicted to illegal substances and eventually began committing crime himself, and now considered a serial killer. Robert killed 4 people, including his girlfriend, who was strangled with an electrical cord. The brothers were estranged for most of their lives, and when a police officer showed Stephen an article about his brother confessing to 4 murders, he said, "I thought I was the only criminal in the family." Number 2, the Menendez brothers. If you were raised in the 90s, you might remember a bit of the Menendez brothers, 2 young men from Beverly Hills, California, who killed their parents on August 20th, 1989, then went on a 6-month spending spree with their parents' money. The case was so shocking to the media, including how after the deaths occurred, the brothers went to watch James Bond's License to Kill and tried to use it as an alibi, how a week prior, their mother confided to her therapist that she was worried that her sons might be sociopaths, and how one brother bought an entire chicken wing restaurant with his parents' money after they had died. Their father was an executive in the entertainment industry and both went to private school, and the older brother, Lyle, was briefly enrolled in Princeton. After 2 deadlocked juries, LA prosecutors retried the brothers in a courtroom that did not allow cameras, and their new jury found them guilty on 2 counts of first degree. They were sentenced by the judge to life in prison. And number 1 is the Manson family. I think it counts to mention this family, even though some aren't necessarily blood related, they still committed a lot of crime together. Coming at number 1 is the Manson family, as the Manson family is known amongst its members as the Family, was a commune gang and cult led by criminal Charles Manson that was active in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The group consisted of approximately 100 followers who lived an unconventional lifestyle, frequently psychoactives including hallucinogens such as LSD. Most were young women from middle-class backgrounds, many of whom were attracted by the hippie culture and communal living and then radicalized by Manson's teachings. According to the group member Susan Atkins, the members of the family became convinced that Manson was a manifestation of Jesus Christ and believed in his prophecies concerning an imminent apocalyptic race war. In 1969, family members Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Patricia Krenwinkel entered the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate and ended her life, as well as 4 others. Linda Kasabian was also present, but she did not take part. Members of the Manson families are also committed a number of other dangerous crimes and assaults, petty crime and thief and street vandalism.
Number 10, Bonnie and Clyde. It probably doesn't get any more infamous and more literal than a crime family when talking about Bonnie and Clyde. They were married, they were husband and wife, makes sense. Part of the gangster era in the 1930s America, Bonnie and Clyde were some of the worst crooks you could come across. Responsible for jailbreaks, bank robberies, unaliving police, and just looking nasty while doing it. A real sweet couple. Their days of crime came to an end when police finally caught up with a young dangerous couple and welcomed them with a barrage of bullets. Bonnie and Clyde were not great actors, but after that they did a great Swiss cheese impression. Fought the law, and the law won.
Number 9, the Winter Hill Gang. One of the most successful organized crime groups in American history, the Winter Hill Gang was actually a team of a bunch of Boston area crime groups. The Irish-American group ran around all over Goodwill Hunting Stopping Ground and were best known for fixing horse races. The gang was famously taken over by James J. Whitey Bulger, who is just an absolutely lovely person. We should just tell him to go watch that movie with Johnny Depp. What's it called?
That movie, it's that one.
Yeah.
I don't remember what's called.
Apparently he does a really good job. The gang disbanded in the late 90s-ish, or at least as far as I know.
Number 8, Lucchese family. This is a list of the worst and most dishonorable families, so there was a good chance that La Cosa Nostra was going to show up here. Organized crime is nothing new in America. Cities like New York and Chicago have a beautiful Italian-American culture, but also the Mafia. Don't forget, they're there too. One such is the Lucchese family. The same one featured in Goodfellas. Now go see that movie. That's a classic. I know the title of that one. Go see that one. It's a good one. The family was responsible for enough crimes to make the rap sheet wrap around your head twice. Most famously, however, was the Lufthansa heist. A heist at JFK Airport back in 1978, stealing an estimated $5.7 million. Now remember, keep your mouth shut and never rat on your friends.
Number 7, the Gonzalez sisters. The 4 Gonzalez sisters ran a successful business from 1945 until the police closed it down in 1964. So what was the business? Adult work. Rancho El Angela was a brothel in the Mexican state of Guanajuato and acted as the center of the sisters' large-scale adult work network. The women who worked for the sisters often did not so voluntarily. The Gonzalez sisters, the Gonzalez family, had kidnapped some, while others answered advertisements for housemates. When the women arrived to the brothel, the sister would often force and inject illegal substances on those who were reluctant to provide the services that the sisters demanded. When the girls became unable to or reluctant to work and satisfy their clients, the sisters then killed them. If a client turned up with a lot of money, he too might end up dead and his cash stolen. When police raided the property, they found the bodies of 80 women, 11 men, and various fetuses. Ugh. There were probably many more victims who remained undiscovered, and the Mexican court sentenced the sisters to 40 years in prison. Guinness World Records even named them the most prolific murder partnership ever. Number 6. The Harp Brothers. Here's another pair of siblings for you, the Harp Brothers. Mekajai and Willie terrorized settlers in the remote, sparsely populated territory west of the Appalachian Mountains immediately after the American Revolution. The brothers had stayed loyal to the British Crown during the struggle and may have decided that they had better moved west after the American victory. They survived by robbing and killing the settlers who were beginning to cultivate the area and appeared to have thoroughly enjoyed the killing part. It wasn't long, of course, before the vigilantes started to bring the brothers to justice, as Mekajai died of his wounds, and when a posse caught up with them in 1799, Willie escaped, but the authorities captured and had him sent to the gallows in 1804. They were considered America's first serial killers of this time. Number 5. The Bloody Benders. Running an Airbnb seems like a lot of work, especially when you're trying to make sure your guests and yourself are happy with the accommodations. You got your nice bed and breakfast, and oh, of course, a nice dinner where the host comes up from behind you and smashes you in the head with a sledgehammer. Oh wait, no, that's not a good idea, actually. Yeah. In 1870s, travelers headed west on the Great Osage Trail may find themselves in a cabin made by the Bender family in Labette County, Kansas, and eventually they would find themselves dead and gone by the family's unexplainable reasons to commit crimes. To be honest, officials still don't know why the crimes were done the way they did. They actually suspected robbery, but most of these travelers weren't even wealthy. Maybe in some sadistic manner, the families just felt like it. But either way, before the locals got suspicious, this family disappeared around the same time another family called the Kellys surprisingly were new in town. Number 4. The Borgias. Originally from Spain, this family became so important in the 15th century political and religious world. Ambition and hunger for yet more power, the family included 2 popes. Lucrezia is probably the best remembered member of the family, as she was the daughter of Pope Alexander, and her family was perfectly happy to use her as a pawn in their power plays. She entered into several arranged marriages, each one helping the Borgias extend their grip. Kind of like in the movie Get Out by Jordan Peele, where they use Rose to get their new vessels for whatever it was that they were doing. Contemporaries often portrayed the extended family as ruthless, a family that would stop at nothing in pursuit of its own ends, and by the time the Alexander papacy ended, people suspected them of adultery, theft, bribery, and breeding, and morally injuring people. Whether or not these situations were true, historians do suspect it might have been conspiracies made by jealous rivals. Number 3. The Bean Clan. Spoiler alert, if you watch Attack on Titan, you might know the scene where Hanji had 2 titans in her custody named Swanee and Bean. Well, those names were actually based on a real family, the Bean family, and their head, Swanee. Although his name is actually Alexander Bean, him and his wife in the 16th century set up a nice little home and abode in a cave by the countryside of Scotland. In their little sea cavern, they produced up to 45 children who were also some a produce of inbreeding. And by that point, they figured they couldn't just hunt for omega-3s by the seas, they needed to resort by some other ways to provide excellent nutrients. So they began tricking, trapping, and kidnapping travelers and dipping them into homemade ranch dressing. That's right, they ate people, and they survived by eating people. The clan only operated at night, and when they returned home to their little caves is where they could eat the roasted man or woman. The locals didn't know this was a thing, and for 25 years the clan survived and ate up to 1,000 people. The family was tracked down by authorities and all died under their custody. The tale of the Bean clan only appeared in a Newgate calendar in the 18th century, and its publications always highlighted awful crimes to educate its readers. However, this was the same type of publication that had the same notoriety as a fake news forum. Number 2. Fred and Rose West. Ever see someone at the bus stop and thought they were really cute, but also thought, hey, you know what, they'd be a great accomplice for a lot of crime? And that's what happened to Fred and Rose West. The 2 serial killers met at a bus stop and somehow created a relationship with one another. From 1971 to 1987, the couple would sought out female victims in Gloucestershire, England, and after tormenting and eventually slaying the victims, they would bury them in their cellar. Earning the name the House of Horrors, among the many victims was actually Fred's daughter. By 1994, the law finally caught up with the couple, and Rose was convicted to up to 10 of the crimes and sentences to life in prison. Meanwhile, her cohort, Fred, took his own life before he could be convicted. When he did die, he did confess to 30 of the victims he tormented, which unfortunately might be even speculating that there's probably more victims left undiscovered. Number 1. Sackler family. The Sackler family is an American family who owned the pharmaceutical company and have faced lawsuits regarding overprescriptions of addictive pharmaceutical drugs, including OxyContin. Purdue Pharma has been criticized for its role in the opioid epidemic in the United States, and they have been described as the most evil family in America and the worst drug dealers in history. They were often cited as early pioneers of medication techniques, which ended the common practice of lobotomies, and were also regarded as the first to fight for racial integration of blood banks. In 1996, Purdue Pharma introduced OxyContin, a reformulated version of oxycodone, in a slow-release form. Oxycodone was first invented in 1916 and sold as Eucodal, but had been withdrawn from the market in 1990 due to addiction issues. Despite them putting out their good deeds through donations by multiple Ivy League schools and art foundations, they're also noted for their money laundering and, of course, the opioid lawsuits. According to The New Yorker, Purdue Pharma played a special role in the opioid crisis because the company was the first to set out in the 1990s to persuade the American medical establishment that strong opioids should be much more widely prescribed and that physicians' long-standing fears about the addictive nature of such drugs were overblown. Yeah, okay. Purdue Pharma was dissolved on September 1st, 2021. The Sacklers agreed to pay $4.5 billion over 9 years, with most of that money funding addiction treatment, as they should.
Number 10. Ma Belland. So Lucy Belland, also known as Ma Belland, was based in Fort Worth, Texas, and she and her offspring sold narcotics, including morphine, no-no snow, and spicy spoon juice. Lucy was often cast as the leader of the, Belland crime family, whose members were convicted of narcotics crimes at least 30 times, 30, between 1921 to 1947. In 1908, the family moved from Grandview to Fort Worth, eventually settling in the Arlington Heights neighborhood. In 1911, her son Charles, barely in the double digits of age, impaled another boy and was charged with causing physical harm, but later released on probation. Later that year, her daughter Willie, then years old, was caught as part of a shoplifting ring of a dozen girls. Police later said that Lucy had organized a shoplifting school for her daughters, with their brothers posing as store detectives. Willie and Cora were arrested for shoplifting from department stores in 1912, and Willie was arrested again in 1912 for possession of no-no snow, and in 1913 for stealing dresses. Willie and Cora were charged with theft again in 1914. Willie was later quoted in the Star-Telegram as saying that she was, 12 years old when she first tried morphine, then costing 25 cents for a big bottle. From 1921 to 1947, members of the family were convicted of narcotics crimes at least 30 times. Once again, 30. I had to say it twice, it's insane. In 1938, narcotics agents purchased and seized 2.3 kilograms of illicit substances from the family. Lucy, Willie, Joe Jr., Charles, Jacqueline, and Leslie were all arrested. Eesh, that's quite the family. Number 9, the Kelly family. So this was an American family of serial killers who operated between August and December 1887 near a town called Oak City, just south of the Kansas state border in no man's land, which is now known as the Oklahoma Panhandle. Yes, I know, I said Texas today. Don't worry. They did have some stuff going on there, just wait for it, promise. The family consisted of William Kelly, his wife Kate, his son Bill, also called Billy, and daughter Kit. Originally from Pennsylvania, the family is believed to have killed 11 wealthy travelers. According to 55-year-old William Kelly's confession, he and his family moved from the Pennsylvania mountains to Kansas in 1869. They moved around to different places along the southern border until eventually settling in no man's land, around 25 miles from Beaver, Oklahoma. Initially dealing with cattle, the Kellys soon opened a tavern where they housed fellow cattlers and travelers. In the span of a few months, though, a number of people had disappeared mysteriously along the road leading to the tavern. Despite this, nobody suspected the family of doing anything until around December of 1887, when the occupants suddenly left the house without notifying anybody. A short while after, a traveler from St. Louis named S.T. Gregg, who had visited the tavern a while before, decided to stop by and check on the house. Upon entry, a foul stench overtook him, coming from a hidden cellar underneath the house. The bodies of 3 men, already in an advanced state of decomposition, were discovered, as well as a trap door under the tavern's floor. Soon after the discoveries, information from Beaver came that all 4 members of the Kelly family had just passed through town a few days ago, en route to New Mexico. A posse of 20 men was quickly organized, and the family's trail led to Palo Duro Creek, from where it appeared that their route had changed towards Wheeler, Texas. I told you. Texas. After a while, the posse caught up with them and engaged in a 2-hour-long chase. Eventually, Kate Kelly's horse tripped and Kate fell to the ground, breaking her neck in the process. She was left behind, and a half an hour later, the vigilantes caught up with Bill and Kit, but William managed to escape. Upon capture, Kit began pleading for mercy, only to be told off by her brother for being as complicit in the killings as he was. Yeah, you guessed it, that was the end of the family. But According to a news report from contemporary media, an unnamed man from Kansas City, who had investigated the notorious Bender family's house and the rumors of their deaths numerous times, claims that the Kellys were in fact the Benders. He pointed out that both families' modus operandi, family unit numbers, and other evidences proved that they are one and the same. Oh, who were the Benders? Well, I'm glad you asked. Number 8, the Bender family. So, this family, more well known as the Bloody Benders, were a family of serial killers in Labette County, Kansas, United States, that operated between May of 1871 till December of 1872. The family supposedly consisted of John Bender, his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and daughter Kate. Contemporary newspaper accounts reported that the Benders' neighbors claimed John and Kate were actually husband and wife, possibly via a common law marriage, which is kinda icky. Estimates report that the Benders killed at least a dozen travelers and perhaps as many as 20 before they were discovered. The family's fate remains unknown, with theories ranging from a lynching to a successful escape. Much folklore and legend surround the Benders, making it difficult to separate, fact from fiction. It is believed that when a guest stayed at the Benders' bed and breakfast inn, the host would give the guest a seat of honor at the table that was positioned over a trap door into the cellar. With the victim's back to the curtain, Kate would distract the guest, while John or his son came from behind the curtain and struck the guest on the right side of the skull with a hammer. One of the women would, cut the victim's throat to ensure death, and the body was then dropped through the trap door. Once in the cellar, the body would be stripped and later buried somewhere on the property. Probably in the orchard, It's good for fertilizer. Although some of the victims were wealthy, others carried little value, and it's believed the family just killed for the fun of it. Alrighty, so what happened to them? Detectives following wagon tracks discovered the Bender's wagon, abandoned with a starving team of horses, with one of the mares not doing so well, just outside of the city limits of Thayer, which was 19 kilometers north of the inn. It was confirmed that the family had bought tickets on the Leavenworth, Lawrence, and Galveston Railroad for Humboldt, and at Chanute, John Jr. and Kate left the train and caught the MK&T train south to the terminus in Red River County near Denison, Texas. Haha, Texas, see? And after that, nobody knows. So I'm gonna go with the theory that they became the Kelly family.
Number 7. Devi, the Maharanis of Cooch Behar. Indira Devi was the daughter of the Maharaja of Baroda, and his second wife was the Maharani. Well, she was betrothed herself to a Maharaja of a different region, Gwalior. However, when she was still young, she met and fell in love with another man who was himself the younger brother to the Maharaja of Cooch Behar. If this wasn't scandalous enough, Indira refused to give up on her love and even chose to boldly break off her own engagement by sending a letter to her fiancé saying that she did not wish to marry him. She did this without consulting her parents, and despite them attempting to dissuade her from marrying her love, she basically did so anyway, with them basically accepting her marriage but refusing to be a part of it at all. So she kind of got disowned, but not officially disowned. Through her husband Jitendra, she would become the Maharani of Cooch Behar, when shortly after their wedding his elder brother died. While their life together was seemingly happy, they quickly had 5 children together. Her husband would die less than 10 years later, leaving her widowed with 5 children and making her the regent of Cooch Behar in his absence, with her eldest son poised to inherit the position of ruler when he came of age. Now, she was not seen as being a very good ruler and often preferred to gallivant through Europe with a passion for fashion, specifically Italian designer shoes, of which she had many, some of which were even diamond encrusted. Though I can't imagine taking all of that on would be easy, honestly. Not to write her off, but just saying. Sounds like she also had kind of a crazy life. Number 6. Singh, the Maharajas of Jaipur. Maharaja Madho Singh II was questionable when it came to how he spent his money. At one point, he used his immense wealth as the Maharaja of Jaipur to order 2 giant silver boats to be made. Around 14,000 silver coins were melted down so that his wish could be granted. Now, why did he need this? Well, because he wanted to carry with him on his trip to Britain a ton of Ganga Jal, which is basically holy water, I believe, or just water perhaps. He just really loved water, I guess. I mean, I can understand if it's holy water, it being somewhat religious, but sounds honestly like a lot of holy water if you got to make 2 giant silver boats. And why exactly did he need to transport it via silver? That's unnecessarily lavish. Number 5. Scindia, the Maharajas of Gwalior. This one actually connects to an earlier story I told of a different family. Remember Indira Devi? This is the man that she was actually going to marry, but she didn't. Maharaja Sir Madho Rao Scindia of Gwalior is an interesting man who seemed very worldly, but like most royals out there, even he had his eccentricities. At one point, he apparently had a model train set made entirely out of silver, which he then used to deliver food and drink around his dinner table. Honestly, I feel like this one is actually one of the lesser vices on our list here. It actually kind of sounds sounds cool, to be honest. However, like all royals, even his family's claim was abolished following the partition. So whether or not it was cool doesn't really matter anymore. Number 4, Kanji, the Nawabs of Junagadh. The Nawab of Junagadh is an interesting one, specifically the ruling of Muhammad Mahabet Khan III Kanji, known as the last Nawab of Junagadh. Muhammad apparently loved his dogs, so much so that it was believed at one point he owned up to 2,000 of them. That's a lot of dogs. While his people struggled living in squalor and poverty, he did things like throw lavish parties for his dogs. Each dog was supposedly given their own room, their own servant, and their own phone. Although I don't know how a dog uses a phone. I guess they just like knock it off the hook and then they just like bark into it. I don't know. Can't imagine they would be able to dial anything, but you know, maybe he also had all of his dogs trained to use the phone? I don't know. At one point, the last Nawab ended up throwing a lavish wedding for his favorite dog, Roshanara, when he ascertained that she had fallen in love with another dog who was named Bobby. He even invited the Viceroy of India at the time, Lord Irwin, to attend, but of course the Viceroy politely declined the invitation because, yeah, that would be a weird thing to attend and also probably doesn't look good on you to go to lavish dog weddings. Number 3, Devi, the Maharanis of Baroda. Princess Sita Devi was once known as the Maharani or Queen of Baroda, but after a time, even her right to rule was pretty much erased. In fact, while she grew up in India and was the Queen of Baroda, she died in Paris, France. During her time as Maharani, she became responsible for many treasures and apparently had an affinity and a love of pearl carpets, of which the Baroda treasury actually had quite a few. I didn't even know pearl carpets were a thing, but apparently they are. A pearl carpet, while luxurious, certainly sounds like it wouldn't be that comfortable, honestly. And while pearls are strong, I would be worried about damaging them by walking all over them. But that's what you do with these carpets. I mean, I don't know, maybe you just like put them out and you just like look at them. And you're like, look at that. Look how pretty that is. Don't step on that, just look at it. Number 2, Khan, the Nazims of Hyderabad. Literally, this family was pretty much erased when you think of what happened to them after India gained independence, with their wealth literally being seized by the government. Mir Osman Ali Khan was the last Nazim of the region known as Hyderabad. During his lifetime, he was also considered to be the wealthiest man in the world, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. Khan's family owned the Golconda mines, thanks to their royal claim, which at the time was the only place, the singular place, supplying diamonds to the world at large. The Nazim's wealth was so great that he apparently used one of the world's largest diamonds, the 5th biggest diamond in the world, known as the Jacob diamond, which weighed around 145 carat, as his paperweight. You know you're on another level when that's what you use as a paperweight. Number 1, Wilayat, the Queens of Oud. This one is quite unsettling in the sense that it was never actually, but for more than 30 years, people believe that this woman, Begum Wilayat, had actually been the Queen of Oud displaced by the partition. However, only a few years ago, we learned that this was all a lie, thanks to the reporting of New York Times journalist Ellen Berry. Berry befriended the younger son of the family, and during the course of her investigation digging into who these people were before chaos ensued, learned that though Begum Wilayat had fervently claimed to be royalty and demanded what was rightfully hers to be returned until she took her own life in the 1990s, the truth was she and her family had apparently never been royalty. Throughout her investigation, Ellen Berry learned that before the partition, Begum had been the widow of civil servant Inayatullah Butt and had been admitted to a mental hospital after he passed away. She would then go on to claim that she was the Queen of Oud and demand back what she said was rightfully hers. Her family was given a dilapidated palace to squat in squalor until all of them each died, only being survived by her eldest son, who had actually run away to London years ago and died in 2019, a few years after the rest of his family. It was also revealed that he'd actually been sending money home to his family in India to help them survive this whole time. What isn't clear is how much of it was truly believed and how much of it was an intentional scam. I don't know if we even know that today. I mean, she could have actually believed it. She was having a rough time, so maybe I don't know.
Number 10, the Papin sisters. A lot of families on this list are mainly siblings, but hey, blood is thicker than water, and for the Papin sisters, so is scandalizing an entire nation and touted as the crime of the century. Christine and Leah Papin were accused in 1933 of gruesomely and mortally wounding their employers in what seemed to be a crazed act of raving madness. The sisters were first separated to work as maids in different households, but when they were reunited, they ended up working for the Lancelin household, a very bougie family in Le Mans. Of course, this was when everything went downhill, as one night, the Lancelin women arrived late from a shopping spree, and upon learning that the power had gone out, Madame Lancelin flew into a rage, and in defense, Christine grabbed a putrid jug and hit her mistress over the head. After which, Genevieve, the daughter, came running after the elder Papin sister, and the scuffle soon turned into a free-for-all. Both sisters then proceeded to tear the Lancelin women's eyes out and hit them repeatedly with a sharp object, and beat their face into a pulp with a hammer. Their case was extremely odd since the motive was still unclear, and the girls were caught up in either grips of insanity or just intentionally tried to put revenge on their employers, who knows. Number 9, Raya and Sakina. Egyptians' most famous serial killers, these sisters began killing women in Alexandria at the turn of the 20th century for a multitude of reasons that remained rather vague if not properly understood. Prime motives point primarily to poverty, class-based anger and paranoia, and perhaps sexual turmoil. For years, by increasing reports of missing women in Alexandria, all tied by two defining characteristics: their gender and apparently their wealth, that they were reported to be wearing gold jewelry and carrying large sums of money. They were also almost always seen with a woman named Sakina, who, despite facing interrogation multiple times, skillfully dodged any suspicions of her involvement. In 1920, when a passerby found a dismembered body, another man also happened to find human remains under his floor tiles while trying to fix a water pipe. Law enforcement put two and two together and realized that Raya and Sakina were renting a home in which they lured wealthy women and eventually ending their lives hiding their remains underground. The sisters were the first women to be given the death penalty in the new formerly Egyptian courts of the time, independent from a colonial rule. Number 8, the Genovese family. I mean, when it comes to crime and families, you're bound to discover, well, crime families. I am a fan of crime movies like Goodfellas, and honestly they had really great actors in that film, and although they are compromised of the 5 top big families, I will start with the Genovese family. The families emerged at the end of the Castellammare War, a mafia power struggle in the early 1930s that was named after the Sicilian hometown of many of the participants. It left as many as 60 mobsters, many high-ranking, dead, plus other organized crime factions throughout the country. Salvatore was also known as Luciano, who was active in profitable extortions, organizing adult work, gambling, and bootlegging schemes. And when he went to prison, Genovese took over as acting boss of what was then the largest and arguably most important and powerful of the 5 families. During the years 1930s and 1960s, there was a constant battle between the members on takeover of control of the businesses and the developments made. The Genovese family is still active in the 21st century, reportedly engaging in such white-collar crimes as extortions, loan sharking, and gambling. A 2006 raid led to the conviction of as many as 30 members of the family on racketeering charges, and 6 alleged associates were arrested in 2022. If I messed up your family's name, I'm sorry.
Number 7, Camorra. Everyone always talks about Italian-American families, but never forget about the motherland. 1, because they are still around to hurl meatballs at you, if you do, and 2, the meatballs they toss to you are the kind you ain't coming back from. The most successful of the Italian mob families, the Camorra has been around since back in the 19th century, just like awkward first dates. In modern times, they pull in around $4.9 billion per year from all kinds of illegal enterprises, from trafficking firearms to extortion. They got their start offering protection services in the 1800s during Italy's violent political struggles, and they've been killing it ever since. It's kind of a bad joke.
Number 6, the Jesse James Gang. The real-life Wild Wild West bank robber, the man, the myth, the literal legend, Jesse James. Every cowboy stereotype fits here. Facial hair? Check. Rough and rugged persona? Check. Robbing and looting with your favorite pair of 6-shooters? Checkerino. That's right, neighbor. No stagecoach was safe, no lady and her baubles were safe. That wasn't until a man named Robert Ford shot Jesse James. However, I'm of the notion that just because you shot Jesse James, that don't make you Jesse James. Hence why I didn't know who Robert Ford was until I made a very savvy Google search. But we've all heard of Jesse James though, haven't we? Strange how that works.
Number 5, the Medellin Cartel. You ever seen Narcos? Okay then, moving on to the next point. I'm just kidding. Pablo Escobar, Colombia. The Medellin cartel was a joint operation between multiple different Colombian traffickers and was in business from 1972 to 1993 in a huge amount of territory. Colombia, Panama, California, New York, Florida, Peru, the Bahamas, Canada. They were moving literal tons of snow each year at the height of the operation, making around 60 million US dollars a day. A day. It became political in its later years, and becoming political always ruins pretty much everything, so.
Number 4, Hell's Angels. As a large white dude, there's something that happens to us when we reach middle age. We get bigger, the bellies hang a little lower, hair grows silver and thinner, our skin begins to darken from years of neglect and binge drinking in the sun while tanning with cigarettes. Yes, that's right, it's time to buy a motorcycle, says the little voice in our heads. What? No, I'm not going through a midlife crisis. This is something said by all Hell's Angels members, or your dad, or your uncle, at one point. Despite being a fun weekend club for dads and uncles to ride bikes and all the good stuff they do, the club sadly has more police investigations than a nefarious motorcycle club that has ulterior motives. Yeah, it's not good. It's not all good stuff. Unaliving, smuggling, well, you get the point here. I'd be here all day listening to all the naughty stuff. At least I'm not insecure about my aging though. I wonder how much a Corvette is.
Number 3, the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was founded in 1910 by Big Jim Colosimo, but its main first leaders were Johnny Torrio and none other than this one guy, you might have heard of him, Al Capone. When they first cropped up, the South Side Gang was fighting gang wars over distribution of alcohol during the Prohibition, but they've moved on to bigger and better things. You know, cheerful stuff like loan sharking, illegal gambling, extortion, political corruption, and that kind of wholesome activity. The outfit has been one of the most powerful, violent, and largest unified criminal organizations in the Midwest of the US.
Number 2, Oil Baron. John D. Rockefeller, the richest American, the CEO's CEO. The owner of Standard Oil, but more importantly, the first oil baron, and really the first man to own a monopoly on the oil industry. Yeah, that's right, I'm throwing a little corporate crime your way. I was gonna put Adam on the list here as a joke, but he didn't want me to bring up his jail time.
Hey!
Nah, I'm just kidding, he didn't go to jail, but he should be arrested though. For being so gosh darn cute, right? Anyways, all joking aside, John D. Rockefeller's wealth was impressive. Today, with inflation, it would sit somewhere in the hundreds of billions. My god. Yes, the family still has the wealth, and no, sadly, I'm not related. Why I bring him up is because laws were created after this manipulation of the oil industry, and the reasons for is absurd wealth. They were created because of him. That's insane. Dude's got a whole square in New York. I can't even afford a closet at those prices. Oh man, someone adopt me.
Number 1, the Cray twins. Reggie and Ronnie Cray. It's the Cray twins, innit? These identical twin brothers were the heads of crime in the East End of London, England in the 1950s and most of the 1960s. They were intermingled with politicians and entertainers through their nightclubs. People like Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland. With friends like that, you're bound to be a celebrity yourself. That doesn't seem helpful though when it comes to being a criminal though, especially when one of you is literally insane. The Cray twins ran the organization known as the Firm, which was involved in crimes like armed robbery, arson, protection rackets, and assault. All the stuff that Andrew does in his spare time. Hey! I am being held against my will. Please call the authorities. Just kidding, he's great, he's great, he's great.
Number 10, Singh, the Maharajas of Patalia. Okay, you have to be kidding me on this one. As unsettling as this story is, I don't think history can actually forget this Maharaja anytime soon, because this story is just honestly that wild. So try as we might, I don't know if it'll be possible. Maharaja Sir Bhupinder Singh was the ruler of Patalia who sired around 88 children. Yeah. You know the saying, diamonds are a girl's best friend? I feel like this man was actually living that as a motto because he loved jewels and he had a ton of ladies. He was married 10 times and also had a bunch of consorts on top of that. Apparently he loved jewels so much, in fact, that once a year he would don only a diamond encrusted breastplate and present himself to his subjects. His virility was famous among them, and rather than actually be dismayed at how many women he had in his life and how many children he'd sired, people actually apparently saw it all as like a good omen, believing his manhood even had special powers and would protect them all from evil. I don't know about that, but it's pretty crazy. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Bumblebee, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. It helps us out, it feeds the algorithm, it feeds us honey, it's just good for everyone. Number 9, Jala Dynasty, the Maharajas of Bikaner. At one point, the dynasty had the claim to multiple lavish properties. However, unfortunately, after they merged with the government of India, giving up their titles, the homes that had once belonged to their family name became too much for them to manage. One such home was the Bikaner House, which was built in the 1930s in America. The 10,000 square yard property was sold to the US government for $4 million due to the family's lack of ability to pay their taxes on the property. Another massive estate in Bombay was sold off to the Indian government as well for $4.2 million. Number 8, Wadiyar, the Maharajas of Mysore. Well, some might say the Wadiyars were attempted to be erased by a curse placed on them by those they had long ago usurped to take control and take the crown for themselves. At least part of this curse, if not all of it, has seemingly been broken at this point. They were cursed to be childless, but the most recently appointed ruler of the royal family actually had a son in 2017 by his wife. However, you could also argue that the Wadiyars as rulers have kind of been erased by history as of the 1970s, when the government of India basically stripped the Maharajas of all privileges and titles. Still, the people of the region respect the royal family even today, even if they do technically hold no power officially, so they still kind of are royal.
Disturbed family number 7 is Scandalous Seymours. We talked about this messy family in the recent Bumblebee video, Top 10 Repulsive Queens with Disturbing Reputations. If you end up enjoying this video, I encourage you to check that one out next, and maybe while you're at it, subscribe to The Hive to keep up to date on our regularly posted content. Jane Seymour has the most recognizable name in the family, thanks to Henry VIII and the fact that she is the only one of his wives he ever truly loved. However, her dad and brother were complete nightmares. To give you an idea, Sir John Seymour was a soldier and courtier, and his son, Edward, was a raunchy little creep. When he's put into an arranged marriage with Catherine Filiot, it changes nothing. The couple hates each other, and Edward takes off to go play toy soldier and bang some random biddies, while Catherine woes away in her lavish mansion and starts venting her problems to Sir John Seymour. Apparently Dad was better at picking brides for himself than for his son, because the two start an unsubtle affair around 1520. Catherine's father removes her as the family heir in response, and Edward refuses to acknowledge Catherine's pregnancy or subsequent child as his own. She ends up rotting away in a convent in the end. As for Edward, well, howdy doody, he remarried Catherine Parr of all people, Henry VIII's widow. But he's also famous for being super weird towards the young King Edward. Yes, everyone is named Edward or Catherine. Welcome to my hell. And also, he was known for hitting on the young Elizabeth I a bunch. One night, he's caught trying to break into the King's Hampton apartment because he accidentally popped one of Edward's dogs. Nobody is sure what he was trying to do, whether it was abduct, kill, or try to impress the juvenile king with a cool hand arm to win more brownie points. It doesn't matter, because Edward Seymour is put to death the next day. Disturbed family member number 6 is the North Shields, aka a death cult, but one of those ones that upheld the whole "oh, we're a family" thing, so I'm counting it. They were led by a vengeful, violent, and brutal individual named Zahid Zaman, who pulled the Trailer Park Boys move of pretending to need a wheelchair when he didn't, and was thought to be a harmless, disabled man in his council estate in Tyne and Wear. He was a regular at charity events with local politicians, and even once refused a reward for returning a lost dog to its owner. But the reality was, he was a callous and uncaring man with a quick temper, berating and harming his group of girlfriends. Regardless, he managed to move all 3 women into his house and conduct adulterous relationships with 2 of them simultaneously, holding their attention with tales of rapture, the occult, God's glory, and your other usual culty mumbo jumbo. This is also how they meet Jimmy Prout, a father of 2 down on his luck after succumbing to substance addiction. Together, the 3 women and Zahid torment Jimmy with regular beatings for weeks on end. He even posted his bruised body on Facebook in a cry for help. The group chiseled out his teeth, forced him to have adult engagements with animals, and even went so far as to cut off one of his, force him to eat it. In February of 2016, Jimmy is killed by Ann Corbett and Zahid as Myra Wood and Kay Rathwood stand back and watch. After his body was found, it was an easy paper trail back to the cult family, who were all subsequently charged. Disturbed family number 5 is fairly well known family. It's the Bean Clan. Legend or reality, fact or fiction, we'll never know, but what we do know is endless movies and TV shows have been based on this iconic family, said to have lived in 16th century Scotland. children. Alexander Sawney Bean was a farm worker, and when escaping some blah 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 blah, he and his wife decided to hole up in a cave and just never leave it. It was also right after they got married. I call that a honeymoon. Look, honey, next to that stalagmite, we can put the chase. Oh, and next to that bear skeleton, we can put the crib. You can't make much money living in a rocky cave land, so Sawney took to watching out for passersby to rob. Wanting to avoid detection as well, he made the logical jump that instead of wearing a disguise while robbing people, he could just kill them instead. The next logic jump after that was, wow, look at all that available meat. So yeah, the Beans took on a new diet after that, and so did their rapidly growing family. Having birthed 14 children, everyone grew up in the cave together, and then proceeded to produce 32 grandchildren without ever leaving the cave. The amassed Bean clan was said to have killed half a dozen victims at one ambush alone. According to legend though, within 25 years their victim count was somewhere in the thousands. Stories go that they met their end when word of the whack-ass situation reached King James of Scotland, who sent soldiers and bloodhounds to go find and kill the group. Disturbed family number 4 is Fred and Rose West, who were so fundamentally evil that their actions genuinely defy logic. Consider them like Britain's version of the Ken and Barbie killers of Canada, as the stories pretty much mirror one another. A couple that kills beautiful women only after the man has had his way with them, whose first victims are some of their own family members, and like the Ken and Barbie killers, a woman of the partnership is more psychotic and evil of the two, yet receives lighter consequences in public perspective. Between 1967 and 87, Fred and Rose killed 12 women, including their own elder daughters from previous relationships. Fred would dispose of the victims, who were often working girls lured in by Rose, who would assume the role of one herself on Fred's request, by burying them under the garage of the house or in the garden, which he pretended was regular home improvement. In order to afford the supplies needed, Fred and Rose were also frequently stealing and fencing the loot. They are eventually caught when one of their surviving daughters breaks down to a friend about the physical violation she had been experiencing her whole life. Her friend, who inadvertently saves more than just her, tells the police. The West couple had already been questioned by the police multiple times by this point, again similar to Ken and Barbie, and then their backyard was dug up and dozens of bodies were found. Fred, like a little B-word, takes his life before seeing court, and Rose goes down on 10 charges and life in prison. Disturbed family number 3 is the Colt family. News spread like wildfire in May of 2012 when a 16-person Britain family was revealed to all share DNA. Naturally, all families share DNA, but I'm talking more like really sharing DNA. All but one family member tested positive for homozygosity, aka their parents were siblings or a parent and offspring combo. 4 generations of these relations had gone virtually unnoticed until authorities investigated the clan living in filthy conditions in the isolated bush block of Australia. They had been sent to investigate, I kid you not, due to the fact that local farmers reported a smell of heavy urine and feces coming downwind. Turns out what they smelled were the open buckets that littered the sleeping area from miles away, and it's also a room that held 20 dogs, so. Many of the family spoke unintelligibly, walked in a shuffling fashion, had never used toilet paper, a toothbrush, they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they had fungal infections and rotting teeth. The family patriarch, Tim Colt, fancied himself a traveling minstrel, the frontman for his touring family's band. According to Daily Mail, Tim, who had moved the family between rural Victoria, Western Australia, and Southern Australia to evade detection of the creepy nonsense, had died by the time of the raid. Tim's wife June, herself the product of a sibling relation, had also died, but not before 2 of their own adult children had firmly established a relationship that would maintain the clan. Disturbed family number 2 is about the man who had the guts. Well, this is the view of the judge, who sentenced Matthew Wales to 30 years jail for the slaying of his millionaire mother and his stepfather. The judge went on to say he had reacted not out of greed, but to what he believed were attempts to manipulate him and his sisters with money. Society killer Matthew Wales seemed to regard himself as a hero for this act, and a psychologist hired to gauge Matthew's mental well-being after his arrest reported that Wales came to believe his mother had dominated him emotionally, physically, and financially all his life. The killings of her and Mr. King represented the ultimate expression of his independence. Matthew's own sisters and biological fathers, after speaking to him, had the impression that their family member thought the family had been done a favor by their mother's death. Matthew had invited his parents into his home for dinner when he laced their soup with powdered blood pressure and migraine tablets, saying he didn't want his mother to feel pain. However, when they left the house, Matt bashed their heads in with a chunk of wood and buried them in a bush. So so that's up in the air. He went on to tell worried siblings that perhaps their parents were victims of a carjacking or a jumping before being caught himself for doing it. Despite the feelings of the judge and the court psychologist, the remaining family said they felt the court had not uncovered the full facts of the case and the method of death. To us, his account was self-serving and based on selfish opportunity and selfish greed. We believe we have a right to the full facts. Disturbed family number 1 is the Philpotts. So, Tuesday, April 2nd of 2013, saw a couple sentenced for what the police have called an evil, stupid, and shameful act as part of a twisted attempt to frame a former lover. This is Mick and May Reed, who alongside a family friend, Paul Mosley, are all convicted of manslaughter for setting their own home ablaze and killing 6 people inside. The purpose of this, as mentioned, was literally revenge on Mick's ex-girlfriend, who escaped the triad relationship wherein she was a prisoner. Mick's plan was to heroically save his family from the fire he set, but that was something that quickly became an impossible feat. And despite this slight hiccup in plans, Mick continued to try and milk the situation. First, he forces May Reed to have adult relations with Paul to keep him silent. Then, Mick exploited public sympathy to raise money for the funerals of the lives lost. He demanded any money left over should be given to his family in Argos vouchers, and he demanded that hundreds of teddy bears that were left outside the burnt out house should be auctioned off and the money given to him. During press conferences, the tearful Mick acted more like an excited child than a grieving parent, reveling in the attention. This is what raises police suspicions, who dive into his record and find charges for an attempted killing and several violations. 2 weeks after the fire, the couple and Paul are arrested. Inside a police-bugged hotel room, they were caught checking their stories with one another before court, and it pretty much sealed the deal. As the jury delivered its verdicts in respect to Philpott, he stood in the dock staring straight ahead with his hands clasped in front of him. He shook his head when the guilty verdicts were read out for him and his wife. She looked down at the floor and fought back tears while clutching a tissue in both hands. They're both monsters. Shh, no spoilers. Anyways, Disturbed family number 10 will be the Ditlows. This is actually far more recent than you may be expecting, hitting the news headlines in March of 2022. But the nightmare began 6 years before that when a Polish woman was smuggled into the UK on a minibus under the promise of starting a new life in the country after losing both of her parents. The woman, unnamed but mentioned to be in her 40s, was given this invitation by Isabella Ditlow and her husband Andreas. She was under the impression she'd be a paid caregiver to Isabella so that her adult children Susanna and Camille could go off to college. Police said the victim worked for the family on the outskirts of Birmingham and Enfield for more than 5 years, in conditions that amounted to modern forced labor. She would do grueling tasks for hours on end, 7 days a week, unpaid, barely fed, forced to sleep in a shed without a bathroom or a shower to clean herself, let alone having a blanket. Police later stated she also was kept isolated, not allowed to use the phone or contact any family, and that her Polish identification card was kept from her, which was the only documentation she had. They made the victim believe should she go to the police, she would never get help and would actually be in trouble. An investigation was eventually launched after concerned neighbors called the Modern Servitude Helpline. The victim needed extensive persuasion to even leave the property, denying she was being held against her will by family. Eventually, they managed to coerce her into a police vehicle for warmth and offered her a coffee. This kind gesture immediately broke her silence. The family of 4 was arrested on May 14th of 2020 and jailed on Friday just after they were found guilty following the 7-week trial. Disturbed family number 9 will be the Fry family demon. So in 2015, the Fry family from South Wales became famous in Britain news, as they say they had been left battered and bruised by an evil incubus demon haunting their home. While the family wasn't clear as to when it started, Tracy and Karen Fry said that it was getting worse and worse and there was nothing we can do, and that it's affected our marriage because we've been drowning and fighting all the time about the demon. It has been feeding off of the negative energy. The demon, believed to be an incubus, was apparently summoned when the Fry's offspring decided to make the classic mistake of effing around with an Ouija board. You'd think people would know by now. Karen is said to have taken this picture, which shows a little blue-faced ghost demon thing with a tail. Kinda looks like a well-placed doll to me, but hey, I wasn't there, I can't know. By the time their story hit the print, the Frys had already paid over £100 for a ghost expert to come in and investigate after the ghost allegedly told one of the Frys that it was going to slit your parents' throats. Ghost investigator Robert Amor, armed with a Bible, crucifix, and a lot of confidence, has since forbid the family from using the upstairs rooms due to the fact you can, quote, feel the evilness in the rooms. Apparently the family's own cats could have just told them that because because they'd been allegedly avoiding those spaces since activity started. Disturbed family number 8 is the White House Farms tragedy. So, August 14th, 1985, the bodies of Neville and June Bamber are found with their adopted daughter Sheila and her family deceased in the Essex farmhouse. Tragically, the placement of the hand arm used and the entry wounds painted an image of a family member going rogue before taking their own life. At first, police believed this to be the case. Sheila had been immensely troubled in her life and was diagnosed with schizophrenia, so it was assumed she'd maybe gone off her medications. Weeks go by and the remaining family member, 24-year-old adopted son Jeremy Bamber, plays the role of a grieving man until his ex-girlfriend hits up the police with some concerning news. She believes Jeremy, who said he was miles away from home when the deaths took place, had done it and framed his adoptive sister. The police look back over the evidence and realize because of the silencer's length that was found on the hand arm, Sheila actually wouldn't have been able to hold it and take her own life. The red flag is now raised. Jeremy's promptly arrested. It turns out it was all for inheritance money. Jeremy was not only after his adoptive parents' life insurance, but his sister's as well, and by eliminating her entire family unit as well as their own, Jeremy would be the sole beneficiary to a 6-figure fortune and multiple properties. He was arrested and charged for the 5 deaths in October of 1986. And speaking of dysfunction, it's the crappy Castiles. Born 4th in line to the throne of her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, Juana was married off to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy at age 16. When a series of sibling deaths made her the heir apparent to Isabella's throne, her husband confined her, using her mother's death in an attempt to press his claim over Ferdinand's for the Castilian throne. Juana already experienced mental illness before this point, and the loss of her mother had been an aggravating factor. Being imprisoned? Yeah, that does not help. After Philip's death in 1506, already known to fly into jealous rages over her husband's mistresses, even reportedly going so far as to attack at least one. Honestly, same energy here, girl. Juana refused to part with her deceased husband's remains for a disturbingly long time and was said to have opened her husband's casket to embrace and kiss him. Juana's confinement continued for another decade after her father's regency until he died. Unfortunately, Juana's husband Philip had spread rumors about her madness when he was still alive, and her behavior after his death didn't help, so her son Charles, who became the Holy Roman Emperor, eventually took over for Juana as regent and then monarch. From then on, it was him who kept her imprisoned and created a fictional world to keep her isolated. No one actually knows if she was crazy or just experienced depression and lived in an era where men undermined her intelligence and constantly threw distressing BS her way. Next up is 2 sets of dirty duos. The extreme punishment of a perceived disgraced royal woman stretches back at bare minimum to, dawn of time. Yeah, we haven't had a lick of peace since men started making rules, to say the least. In 1314, the high-spirited Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, daughters-in-law to King Philip of France, were accused of having scandalous liaisons with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gaultier d'Aunay. According to historian Alison Weir, the notorious Queen Isabella of England was the gossip girl who outed her pretty careless sister-in-laws out of wedlock romps, which took place primarily in the Parisian tower called Tour de Nesle. Blanche and Marguerite both admitted to their adultery because it was that or death, so I mean, their erasure from public life was swift. They had their heads shaved and they were tossed in the rich white girl dungeon, which isn't that bad. Meanwhile, this is the one time in Western history where the men actually faced a pretty harsh adultery consequence, something usually found in every other area of the world. The brothers had their elephant trunks and boys chopped off while they were awake and alive, and then their nether regions were thrown to dogs, which they had to watch the dogs eat before being brutally executed. Marguerite, technically Queen of France upon her husband's ascension to throne, died in 1315, and Blanche languished in captivity, whereabouts barely known, and died in 1326. Modern day monarchy wouldn't be complete without a tax fraud family. 2014, the dubbed philandering playboy king, King Juan Carlos of Spain, found his popularity plummeting. His initial ascension to throne in 1975 had been wondrous, but now following reports of his messy affair and exuberantly lavish lifestyle in the midst of Spain's economic collapse, he abdicated the throne in favor of his son Philippe. His daughter Infanta Cristina stirs the pot, charged with tax fraud in 2014. Although she was acquitted in 2017, she was stripped of her title and left Spain for Switzerland. But it was her husband's turn, I guess, because the former handball champion was convicted on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion and sent to prison in 2018. Since then, Spanish prosecutors launched 3 separate investigations into the former king over allegations including corruption, money laundering, credit card fraud, and kickbacks, though all were dismissed earlier this year due to insufficient evidence, the statute of limitations, and of course the monarch's constitutional immunity. In a recent case, Seguin Wistine has sued him for using Spain's spy agency to threaten her, and in 2020 he was stripped of his Spanish stipend and went into self-exiled in the UAE. First, the great-grandmother, an imprisoned princess. Starting in 1682, Princess Sophia Dorothea of Sailly married the basic B-word George of Hanover. She didn't like him, his stupid court, or the mistress that dominated his life, so in 91 she starts her own affair with Philip Christoph von, hard last name, it sounds super Scandinavian. They're naturally very stupid and their love letters get intercepted by Clara, Countess von Platen, who was Sophia's literal mistress-in-law, and Clara tells the whole royal family, who act like a mob and hire 4 dudes to kill Philip right outside of Sophia's apartment, in her line of sight. Then they took Sophia's kids away and told them to forget her existence. They imprison her at Alden House in Germany, and to save face, Sophia Dorothea is titled a duchess, allowing her to administrate over a small village, receiving dignitaries and other religious figures in her gilded cage, although she was only allowed to walk or ride on short bits of the road. It's said that the notorious hateful relationship between George I and his son George II was the cause of the disrespect towards his mother Sophia. She had died at Alden House in 1726, largely forgotten, and her legend would only resurface a few decades later due to a scandal that swirled around her great-granddaughter, Cataline Matilda of Great Britain, the sister of King George III. Now, the great-granddaughter, Queen of Tears. In 1766, at the age of 15, the daring and eccentric Catalina Matilda is married to cousin King Christian of Denmark, who suffered from being a massive insipid turd who grew up with untamed anger management and insecurities that made him into a deranged bully as an adult. Christian treated Caroline exactly how you would imagine from that description. He even delayed consummating their union for years, which is wildly unheard of. She traveled alone, no maids or family or rich folk stuff, to Denmark from England, and no one even told her he was a nutcase who would hate her. Yeah, no, by 1770 she was having her own affair with Johan Friedland Struensee, and the two lovers soon scandalized Europe by essentially taking over Denmark, issuing reforms and infuriating the nobility. Caroline Matilda was riding high, striding through the court in men's clothing, subverting the patriarchal codes of the day. In 772, Denmark's Queen Juliana Maria orchestrated a palace coup, and the increasingly tyrannical Johan is executed in April. Catalina Matilda is banished and disgraced. Her unacceptable conduct convinces her brother George that he could not welcome back this criminal sister into the English royal family. Ripped away from her children, she is sent to Celle Castle in Hanover, and like her great-grandmother, put under a sort of Gentile house arrest. Unlike her great-grandmother, she is allowed to walk through town, earning praise from commoners for her kindness and charity, because it doesn't count as a crime if he did it to himself. Most of the information we have about Crown Prince Sado, born in 1735, comes from the wife's autobiography, Queen Hayejeon, written in 1805. She recalled what happened as his disease progressed. Prince Sado's mental health further deteriorated by 1757, following the death of the queen and his adopted grandmother. To release his emotions and frustrations, Sado began to beat the court eunuchs and staff. When that wasn't enough, he began to kill. Here's what his wife's account was of that. The first person he killed was Kim Hachia, the eunuch who happened to be on duty that day. The prince came in with the severed head and displayed it to the ladies in waiting. The bloody head, the first I ever saw, was simply a horrifying sight. As if he had to kill to release his rage, the prince harmed many ladies in waiting. I suffered so for this. His illness seeped deeper and deeper. Now that he was killing people, our quarters became a house of horrors, in which no one could be certain that they would not fall victim next. Eventually, Prince Sado kills his favorite mistress and threatens his own sister. In 1762, realizing the disgusting conduct would ruin the Korean family, his mother appealed to his father and they had to eliminate their own child. Since tradition dictated that his wife, Lady Hyejong, would have to die as well as their son if they punished Prince Sado, the king came up with a bizarre solution to safeguard the daughter-in-law and heir. On a sweltering day in July, the king forced Sado to step into a rice chest that would then be locked. locked. So that way, technically, the disgraced prince had caused his own death. He died 8 days later. And I can't even give you a funny title for this one because it's just a lot. This is the Crop Top King. King Maha of Thailand, crowned in 2019, is a philandering train wreck hot mess. When his third wife dumped him, he tossed her parents in prison for 2.5 years for royal defamation. His earlier 2 marriages were equally rocky. He allegedly fathered 5 children with a mistress during his first marriage to his cousin, and then married said mistress. Later he dumped her and made her flee the country. When he was crowned prince, taking a page from Caligula, he appointed his pet poodle Fufu to the royal air chief marshal, then held 4 days of Buddhist funeral rites when the poodle died in 2015. He even took the pooch to a 2007 reception hosted by His Honor the US Ambassador Ralph Skip Boyce. Then there is the 70-year-old king's fondness for wearing crop tops and temporary tats. Check out this sick pic at an airport in Munich, strutting his stuff with a rolled up tank top, sagging jeans, and fake tattoos with the poodle in tow. Call this king a queen cause he is serving! Belly-bearing bets have become the garment of choice for many young Thai pro-democracy protesters in rallies in recent years. They are looking to limit the powers of the king who has become the richest monarch in the world, partly by amassing personal control of an estimated 43 billion in royal assets in 2018 that were historically overseen by an agency meant to manage the money for the benefit of the Thai people. His response for this was to ban crop tops. In July 2019, 2 months after the king married his 4th wife, his longtime mistress Siniat was made a royal consort in hopes of getting her to shut up and accept that he'd never marry her and make her queen. 2 months later, because this didn't work, he strips her of her titles, tosses her in jail until she can learn to behave, and after 10 months, she's released back to his custody for about 2,000 explicit images of them to get leaked to the entirety of the Thai community in a cyber attack, and everyone sees these guys, they're explicit. Obviously, I could keep talking about this guy and his gross scandals forever, there's no shortage of them, but instead, we'll stare at these airport photos again because man, what the hell am I seeing here? The Secret Love Child. Writer Mariel Daniels, then a 16-year-old working on a biography of the Belgian Queen Paola in 1999, casually discovered, the then reigning King Albert II fathered an illegitimate daughter during an affair that lasted 18 years. Casual stuff, you know? She was born Delphine Bowles in 1968, daughter of Baroness Sybil Delcilius Longchamps, and from an early age, Delphine did know who her biological father was. Albert, who she nicknamed Papillon, was a constant presence in her childhood, even taking her on holiday. Though apparently an open secret in royal circles and the reason for marital troubles between the king and the queen, the story only became publicly known in 1999. Delphine had been speaking with Albert her whole life up to this point, who then reassured her that it would just blow over. But then in 2001 his tone changed. He told Delphine he wasn't her father and broke off their contact, leaving her in a state of shock. She eventually launched a legal action to secure recognition in 2012, but it dragged on for years as Albert continued to deny paternity. But when he stepped down from the Belgian throne in 2013, he lost legal immunity, so off the court they went. And it was only in 2020, after court-mandated DNA tests proved irrefutably that the former monarch was the father of artist Delphine Bowles, Albert was finally forced to acknowledge he'd fathered a child out of wedlock 51 years prior. And when it comes to siblings, you know what a big deal it is to say, I call dibs? William the Conqueror, the first Norman king of England, had 4 sons. One died before him, but William split his kingdom between his remaining. Robert, who was given Normandy, and William, who was given the whole dang throne of England. That left the youngest Henry just cold hard cash. William consoled Henry with the prediction that he would one day amount to much more than either of his siblings, who proceeded to make his life hell, stealing from him and locking him away routinely. Then in 1100, William, the older brother, dies in a hunting accident. Henry didn't even bring the body back. I'm not kidding, he got on his horse and he went around and galloped to secure the royal treasury in Winchester before rushing to London, where he was crowned on the 5th of August 1100. He was king before Robert, returning in triumph from the First Crusade, even knew the crown should have been his. Robert attempted to take England for himself, but Henry beat him back, and then after a few years took Normandy too. Robert was captured and Henry kept him in prison for the rest of his life. Henry ruled for 35 years in total and lost his only heir to the sinking of the White Ship, causing a royal succession civil war called the Anarchy.
Number 7, the Par Empire. Alrighty, so after all the mass killing families, time to refresh with a simple mob boss style situation, as a little palate cleanser if you will. Operating in the early 1900s, the PAR machine functioned on bribery, graft, and illegal donations. Political support came from the southernmost counties in Texas, and the machine could produce large numbers of votes, both legal and illegal, from the impoverished and uneducated working class citizens. While the PAR machine had always asserted undue influence over the county's affairs, it was not until Archer Parr that its leadership felt safely secure to overwhelm the remaining independent farmers by appealing directly to the county's new majority by offering them jobs, and in some cases cash directly from the county coffers in exchange for political support. George Parr engaged in the graft, bribery, and fraud that are, often associated with political machines, and along with other large landowners and managers of landed estates owned by prominent Eastern businessmen, Parr helped develop the practice of working illegal citizens and later using them for advancing political interests. More importantly, his own political career included serving as both the Duval County judge and sheriff. He also owned the San Diego State Bank and the famous Dobie Ranch, including the Parr's Los Horcones Ranch. He was also a partner and silent partner of dozens of other businesses, which seems like a conflict of interest. He was convicted of tax evasion in 1932 and eventually served 9 months in federal correctional institution after violating his parole. Number 6, the Cat family. So, the Cat family, consisting of Ronald Scott Cat and eventually his 2 offspring, Hayden and Abigail, were responsible for a number of bank robberies in the Portland, Oregon, and Houston, Texas areas. After the death of his wife, Cat was facing financial difficulties due in part to his multiple substance addictions and unstable employment history. He decided to bolster the family's income by, why not, robbing banks. He and his family committed several robberies, all occurring while the family lived a seemingly typical middle-class American life. So originally they did it in Oregon, and then they decided, let's start fresh in Texas. So in 2012, Cat, now with the help of both of his offspring, decided to embark on a crime spree while the family kept up a facade of normality. The first robbery that Scott perpetrated with the help of his family occurred at a Comerica bank in Harris County on August 9th. Scott and Hayden entered the bank wearing hats, sunglasses, surgical masks, gloves, and painter's coveralls, armed with lethal-looking, pew pew. Abigail waited outside in the family car with stolen license plates, and everybody got away. Now, the second robbery, which occurred on November 9th, took place at the First Community Credit Union in Katy. Now, because preliminary observations of the intended target showed a construction project was taking place nearby, Scott and Hayden wore bright orange safety vests and sunglasses to blend in with the construction workers, which makes sense. This time, Hayden wore a fake mustache, and Scott wore his familiar painter's mask. Abigail once again drove the getaway vehicle. Together, the 2 robberies netted the family around $170,000 from the Texas banks. Number 5, Mark Anthony Condit. I swear you'll understand why he's on the list by the end. So the Austin serial explosions occurred between March 2nd and March 21st of 2018 in Austin, Texas. In total, 5 package explosives exploded, ending the lives of 2 people and injuring another 5. The perpetrator, 23-year-old Mark Anthony Condit of can't say that name of that town. And the perpetrator was pulled over by police on March 21st and detonated an explosive inside his vehicle, killing himself and injuring a police officer. He was the eldest of 3 offspring and attended Austin Community College from 2010 to 2012, leaving without graduating but apparently in good academic standing. He was homeschooled by his mother, who in February of 2013 officially graduated him from high school. Yep, that was after his college stint, because that totally makes sense. He wrote a lot of really weird blog posts in 2012 where he identified as a conservative who was not that politically inclined. He argued for the death penalty and argued against same-sex marriages and schmeck offender registries. He was reportedly part of a club called the Righteous Invasion of Truth, and the club's members were homeschooled young people. They also practiced homeschooling, practiced survivalism, and held Bible studies. Hey, I see the evil in the family, don't you? Number 4, Edward Harold Bell. So he was an American schmeck offender, killer, and the first fugitive to be featured in the Texan rendition of America's Most Wanted. According to his claims, his father, an oil field worker, frequently moved the family to various towns surrounding the Houston area, and allegedly suffered physical harm both from him, his scoutmasters at the Boy Scouts, and one of his cousins. Bell would also claim in later interviews that his father encouraged him to do violent crime, ranging from robbing banks and taking advantage of women sexually, in addition to encouraging him to take his own life. After graduation, he found work as a licensed driver and married his first wife in San Marcos, with the newlyweds then moving to Western Texas, where they had 3 offspring. Following his capture in Panama City in 1993, he was extradited, convicted, and sentenced to a 70-year term for the killing of a Marine in 1978, and later confessed to killing 11 girls throughout the 70s. Okay, maybe don't claim to be from the Bell family if you ever go near Texas. Number 3. Kaufman County killings. So in 2013, 2 prosecutors and a prosecutor's wife were killed in Kaufman County, Texas. Eric Lyle Williams, a former lawyer and justice of the peace, whose theft case was prosecuted by 2 of the victims, was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to death for 2 of the deaths. He was also charged with the killing of a prosecutor, Mark Hasse, but a decision was made to not prosecute him as he'd already received a death sentence for the others. His wife, Kimberly Irene Kim Williams, was tried separately and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Hey look, a family can be 2 people. Number 2, the killings of Rick and Susanna Walmsley. Alright, so this is more of like a chosen family than anything, and as somebody with more chosen family than actual family, sadly that counts in my book. Rick and Susanna were killed on December 11th of 2003 in their home in Mansfield, Texas, as part of a conspiracy involving their son Andrew and 2 others. So originally they were hit by a tiny explosive and impaled to death in their home by Andrew's friend, Susanna Toledano. The killings were part of a scheme orchestrated by Andrew, his girlfriend Chelsea, and Susanna to collect the $1.65 million estate. The 3 conspirators also wanted to kill Andrew's older sister, Sarah, but she wasn't home that night. It's one twisted chosen family. Number 1, the Bogle family. So, when Bobby was, let's say, that much old in 1969, he woke up on Christmas morning to a heavy metal wrench in a plain brown paper bag under the tree. Later that day, he and his brothers used the wrench to break into a local grocery store and steal pop, making his father, a career criminal who went by the name Rooster, proud. This family crime spree spanned 4 generations and crossed multiple states, from Texas to Oregon, beginning in the early 1920s with ancestors who were moonshiners and carnival workers, and involved hundreds of felonies covering just about every genre of lawlessness, from death and sodomy to burglary and insurance fraud. They stole everything from chickens and cows to lumber and metal, and once broke into a government-run fish hatchery just to gorge on salmon. When the children were barely in middle school, they were already stealing 18-wheelers. Unlike other vicious families on this list, being part of a close, loving, and supportive family is what made them what they are. Granted, nobody in the family was especially bright. They killed people and then would make calls to their mother from the victim's home phone, and they once melted a stolen safe with a torch and tried to spend the burnt money. I feel like y'all get the gist of it, but it's quite the family legacy.